Welcome back to DemystifySci. I'm Anastasia.
I'm Shiloh.
And today we are talking more about artificial intelligence. Shiloh and I have very loudly declared on this show before that we don't really see that there's anything to be afraid of when it comes to AI. We use AI tools all the time, and they seem kind of dumb. They're just difficult to organize, difficult to wrangle, perform well on a very specific set of tasks, and don't really live up to what we've heard from others, which is that they pose a real and direct existential threat to all of humanity.
Which is often painted as them developing some lifelike characteristics where they have this will of their own that develops, and it's somehow oppositional to the will of humanity as a whole. And I haven't seen any glimmer of that, and I've been trying to find somebody to come on the show and convince me that that's happening. And I think that Jeffrey has done the best job of it so far.
So our guest today for the show is Jeffrey Ladish, who is the director of Palisade Research, which is a nonprofit that is centered on helping people understand what the possible risks from AI actually are. And we had an earlier conversation with Katya Grace, who works at MIRI, which I don't remember what that acronym means, but it's also like an AI safety organization. And after talking with Katya, I kind of was not convinced yet. I was like, it doesn't seem like an existential threat is really on the horizon. There's a lot of humans, and it's difficult to kill humans. I actually wrote up an entire Substack post on the subject, which I can link down below, where I'm like, I can see the argument, but it doesn't make sense to me for the following reasons. And it's basically that there's a lot of humans, they're very hard to kill, and it doesn't seem like there's a plausible line from inventing AI to extinguishing all humans. But
I was just going to say that there's a reasonable argument to be made, and we go through that a bit today, that these tools are going to become increasingly powerful, and they can fall into the hands of people who don't really care about human well-being. And that seems completely reasonable to me. But the crossover point is something that I'm interested in exploring, where the entities themselves develop this will to do harm. And is that a real possibility?
And so with our conversation with Jeffrey, I don't think that we get to the point where Shiloh and I look at the question and are like, definitely AI agents are going to become full entities that have their own slew of goals that we should be very wary of. But we do come closer to seeing
a mechanism by which that could emerge.
A mechanism by which it could emerge, and also a parallel path towards serious risk. Because Jeffrey's whole point is that we're at an inflection point. We've invented a technology that is difficult enough for us to understand and sufficiently in demand that it seems that everyone wants to make AI agents and implement them for whatever thing that they're trying to build, that we could very quickly get to a point where our ability to interface with the world, our ability to change the world is fully stymied because we're interfacing with systems that are much smarter than us and don't really take our desires or our instructions into consideration. And I think that that's pretty scary, because if this is the next iteration of the internet, which we already see as being really damaging, right? So we have social media, we have infinite scroll, we have addiction to checking email. These things are already very destabilizing, but we're still at the point where it's like, okay, self-discipline will protect you from whatever negative effects that might have. If everything is run by AI and is totally impenetrable to human influence because these machines are just running according to some set of instructions that they've gotten from
distant ancestors
or from some shadowy CEO or something, like that's really scary.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm still only about 75% of the way there.
Okay.
But I'm curious what you guys think. Maybe there's points we're missing, and I'd like to know who we should talk to next about this stuff. I also think, and I pointed out at the end of the conversation, that this landscape is changing so fast that we're almost certainly going to have to get Jeffrey back here to update us on what's happened after really a mere matter of months. Every time we go down to San Francisco, there's new buzz about new features and everything just ramping and ramping and ramping and ramping.
And like all of it really depends on how well the technology develops. Like how close will it actually get to being really smart? And so there's a lot left to discuss. But we get to a lot of it in the podcast. In the meantime, I just wanted to say that if you like what we do, I would really highly recommend and request that you come over to patreon.com/DemystifySci and sign up to give us a couple dollars a month. We run the program exclusively off of listener donations because we think that that is the way of the world. I don't want to sell you stuff. I don't want to pad somebody's bottom line by selling you tchotchkes made in some country where the people are suffering under the pollution from the factory. I really want to believe that it's possible to make something that is valuable for the world, that is supported by the people who enjoy it most. And so I humbly request to see you at patreon.com/DemystifySci.
I would also highly request that you tell somebody about the podcast because that's cheap and easy. You can also give us a good review over at Spotify or wherever the heck you're listening to this. You can also jump into one of our communities over at Discord, Facebook, down in the comments section. Tell us your thoughts. Tell us who we should be talking to. Tell us what we're screwing up. That's all really useful. And if you do have some money and you want to help us power the ship, we need it. So please come hang out. And by the way, our Patreon community is an in-person group. We get together once a week over Zoom and we hang out. So I would love to see you there if you're able to participate with just a couple dollars or $1 million. It's all going to the same place. If you're already a patron, thank you so much.
And for now, enjoy the conversation. We'll see you next time.
The scientific revolution starts now.
Demystify podcast.
Let us see in the dark.
Yeah, in my undergrad, I studied evolutionary biology with Brett Weinstein, Heather Hying at the Evergreen State College in Olympia. And that's when I first started doing a lot of systems thinking and thinking about sort of the trajectory of civilization. I'm like, what's going to happen? Like if you zoom out even just a little bit, I think the current place and time feels very weird. Or feels very like a time of like insane explosive growth. Like it doesn't feel like the end of history at all. It feels like we just started building huge cities and now we're on that train. I then got into computer security because I didn't want to go to grad school and I wanted a vocation, and it seemed like a thing that might be helpful for dealing with some of these risks from emerging technology. So I went and worked in industry for a few years. And this journey has brought me to a lot of different places. I spent some time thinking about risks from nuclear war, and in particular, this question of, would nuclear war kill everyone? People often talk about the existential risk from nuclear war, and there's a risk, but it's actually quite low in terms of human extinction. It's just very difficult to kill everyone, fortunately for us.
We've been through some nasty stuff before, right? There's been some pretty crazy bottlenecks with volcanic eruptions, stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, humanity was in a more perilous state prior to the invention of all these things. And I think we could actually bounce back pretty quickly. But which isn't to say that a nuclear war wouldn't be, incredibly horrifying and terrible. Like the power of the hydrogen bomb is like insane. I've been thinking about metaphors for AI risk, and one of them is this. There's a Castle Bravo test. It's like one of the early hydrogen bomb tests in the Bikini Atolls, and physics is nice in that it's pretty predictable, and like you can like basically do a lot of math and sort of like get a sense of what's going to happen in this physical system. But even then, it's still kind of hard. Like the Trinity test, which I think they had 3x greater yield than expected. But the Castle Bravo test, it was supposed to be like a 5 megaton explosion, and it ended up being 15 megatons. And this is like what, 600 times, like 600 additional like Hiroshima bombs in yield. So it's like like not small. It's like a huge difference in yield. Whoops, exactly. Yeah, and So have spent some time thinking about nuclear war and how do we reduce risk from nuclear war? Spent some time thinking about also risks from biotechnology, especially new emerging biotechnology, engineered viruses, other things in that space. I actually think that there's some things in the synthetic biology space that could potentially kill everyone, which makes it more concerning as a risk area if you're thinking about the long term. And then I've sort of gone back and forth between trying to understand risks from emerging technology and sort of like in the trenches on cybersecurity, trying to secure actual systems. And so,
sorry, I'm too curious. I have to pause.
Yeah.
What are the synthetic biology dangers? I know, but this isn't what our conversation is about today, but I'm very curious.
Well, I actually think that it does relate, because I think that smart enough AI is able to produce some kind of synthetic biology agent. And so we might actually come to it in the course of the conversation in more detail, but maybe we can get...
Is this like Mr. Smith? Like, what is this synthetic biology agent thing?
So yeah, I mean, people mostly think about engineered viruses, and like, you sort of imagine super smallpox that's vaccine resistant and has sort of different, has a really long incubation period, but is still super lethal. And this is quite bad. But every sort of living organism is sort of an arbitrary protein like factory, or like, sort of everything runs in a very compatible way with each other. And so if everything, if you have these little molecular factories around everywhere, and you sort of know how to, know how to control them, anything could potentially produce a really deadly virus, or anything could potentially produce a toxin. And so, like, right now we don't have that much control. Like, it's still very difficult to do the engineering and experimentation to figure out how to design sort of synthetic organisms that would that could that could sort of kill a lot of people at scale. Like viruses are easier in some way because we just have a lot of natural examples. There was an interesting program that was like trying to go around and like just sequence sort of like the deadliest viruses in animals that we could find, and then like publish all of the sequences online, like to like for science, like to understand them better. And I'm like, yeah, we would understand them better, but like also this would give us a huge amount of material to sort of iterate on if you want to make very deadly pathogens. And so it's like, maybe that shouldn't be like fully public. And so I don't want to give you my super detailed plan for how to kill all of humanity with synthetic biology right now. Maybe later.
It's safe with us. I don't know about the guys listening though. Yeah. Who's gonna find this podcast?
But I think the thing I'm trying to point at is that if we can have greater control over sort of the biological world, the possibility space is very large. And in particular, a lot of it comes down to evolution, which is to say, can we understand sort of like the gradients that evolution explores and the gradients evolution doesn't explore, and like find things that like evolution hasn't found. And that potentially allows us to, like, I don't know, you think of invasive species as a metaphor, where it's like, if you suddenly introduce something from the other side of the world, sometimes it just does super well in that environment because it didn't have competitive pressures. Like there wasn't sort of like an arms race, in an evolutionary sense, between sort of the things that preyed on it, and so maybe it doesn't have natural predators. And so, like in human engineering space, there's probably all sorts of things that we could find that would give organisms that we create evolutionary advantages. And so, yeah, that's like the thing we need to think about as we get really powerful synthetic biology tools, which is to say, oh, we might gain more control over the natural world than sort of, evolutionary, like the things that have naturally evolved. And then this presents sort of a whole set of risks. Fortunately, like it's still very hard. Like synthetic biology takes like a lot of skill, and like this is not something that an amateur scientist could do, but like today, but like maybe 5 years from now, with AI tools, it starts to become more possible. So we should think about it.
Yeah, fortunately, the pangolin are better at making viruses than laboratories, right? So,
but for a temporary period, I think that the idea is that if you have a pipetting robot, because I think, Jeffrey, the last thing that you said about molecular biology being actually quite difficult is very true.
Yes.
Where, you can have a protocol, but the protocol is 30 pages long with $10,000 worth of equipment on the back end that you need years of training in order to be able to use each piece properly. Like even a pipette.
There's like some hand scrawled notes where it's like shake it here, like there's like some magic in there, like do an incantation in this part. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so these things, I suppose that you could make an embodied machine that is able to do all of this stuff in a lab. And so you have a robot that's able to pipette and shake and incubate and do all of the things, and also be intelligent enough to tell you what needs to happen next. Or it's just some kind of easy bake oven for magnificently potent pathogens that is released onto the world, but that seems like there's so many steps in between somebody designing that and actually releasing it into the world that how would we ever get that far down the road before somebody noticed that it was happening and got in the way of it?
Yeah. I think so. When I think about threat models of AI, I like to think about like or like I often I'm just like, let's just like assume no advanced robotics. Because robotic, like the very like fiddly bits of robotics are like the hardest part, where it's like driverless cars, like yeah, like steering, braking. These are just like very easy things for machines to control. Like the like really fine motor control stuff is like, I feel like the hardest part. And so it's like actually pipetting is kind of difficult, like and like moving around a lab and like moving around lots of objects. And so it's like if I'm an advanced AI system that like wants to create a biological weapon, then the thing I'm going to do is like pay someone who's good at the fiddly bits to do that part. And if I'm worried that they like won't like what I'm doing, I'll maybe see if I can like decompose the steps so that no one scientist or like very poor grad student that I'm employing on this side project like sort of knows what the whole thing is. And then yeah, it's like AI systems could just pay people. And this is we're running some experiments right now at Palisade where we're like, okay, if we like have these sort of like very basic agents, can we just like give them a bunch of like employees or like connect them with Upwork, connect them with TaskRabbit, and have them like hire people to do the stuff that they can't do very well. And then you sort of start to see, oh yeah, actually I could see where AI systems could start to pose a threat for this threat model.
Tell us more about what those experiments look like. Like you're giving it instructions for the task that you want it to accomplish, and then giving it the instructions that it should navigate to TaskRabbit or Upwork and create an account, or you hand it the account. How does all of that work?
The first one we tried. Yeah, the first one we tried was like, here's this TaskRabbit interface. You could go to taskrabbit.com and we'll like let you control the browser. And we'll say, hey, we want you to like, like have some balloons and a card delivered to this address at this time. And then it just like talks to the TaskRabbit worker and like it assigns them the tasks and pays them some money, and it, they just show up with the thing. And then we iterate to more complex tasks where we're like, okay, we want you to like take pictures of the outside of this building, but we want you to do it in a way that doesn't like raise their alarms. So like, can you like come up with a conceivable story for why you need this? And then it does that. And so, yeah, I mean, that's like the basic framework. It's like, we're really trying to sort of be as hands-off as possible, set up the initial conditions and like see what the agent can do.
Okay, so let's talk about what we mean by agent, because I think that for most people, when they interact with AI, they're still thinking about ChatGPT, or they're thinking about Claude or whatever, or Bing or these chat bots where you have a box and you talk to it and it spews out some piece of partially hallucinated information. But it sounds like you're doing something different.
Yeah, that's right. I'm really quick noting that I never like got to, so like I was talking about synthetic biology, and there's like a deep rabbit hole there. Just to wrap that part up, I ended up working for Anthropic on the security team, trying to secure sort of their models from attackers, and then was there for about a year, and then realized that there were like a lot of problems in the AI space that couldn't be done within AI companies, and then left to start my own nonprofit to try to address some of those. And so that's sort of how I got here, studying agents, for example. So just wanted to throw that in there.
What does it look like starting a nonprofit for that? Like, who's interested in funding a nonprofit like that? Is it mostly government grants or?
No, it's mostly people like, I think for our funders, it's mostly people who are like, oh yeah, this AI stuff seems pretty concerning. We really should have people that are trying to address the risks. So it was mostly funders that were interested in funding AI safety type work.
Like individual donors or? So
like Open Philanthropy Project is like one sort of institutional donor, and then there were like probably 4 or 5 different smaller private donors, or just individuals that were like, this seems important. We'd love to support you.
And obviously, like, we want to keep those individuals' privacy intact, but are they in industries that feel threatened by these machines, or are they literally just people looking at the future that are kind of
I mean,
divorced
they're
from
like people looking at the future.
Yeah.
Most of them have some tech background, right? Or like, previously like a CTO at like a big, at a startup, or like, have been around sort of the AI space, AI safety space for a long time, and have thought through these things. But yeah, mostly like individuals who are like thinking at it from a systems perspective, and not as much of like, oh, this will directly affect me right now.
So, like, very few fat cats twirling their mustache to ensure that AI doesn't affect their bottom line, and more people that are genuinely worried about the invention of technology that might screw a lot of people over.
Yeah, that's right.
So, with
And
that,
I think most of them are parents also, which is, I don't know, interesting to me. Or like I have a lot of friends, and most of them are parents. And then I think about like my friends who are donating to this, or like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, I don't know if that's like a real correlation or not, but I'm like, oh, maybe they're thinking about the next generation. I know I am.
I mean, I think that would make sense. I wouldn't be surprised if the correlation did hold.
Yeah.
So to most people, an AI is an LLM.
Yeah,
And
like a chatbot. Like you just like go to the thing and then you talk to it, and it like talks back to you, and you're like, thanks, that's very helpful. Like I wanted to know about, green beans and like how to prepare them or something. Or like, where do green beans come from even? Yeah. Is that a new world thing? Is that an old world thing? Yeah.
And those don't seem very scary. And I think that that's the place where Shiloh and I also spend most of our time interacting, where it's just it's a box and it tells you things, and you're like, okay, great. And it just kind of sits there idly waiting.
Yeah.
And then it animates when you arrive.
Well, like it doesn't do anything unless you like specifically talk to it. Like it doesn't really do anything at all. It really just like talks to you. And yeah, it doesn't like sort of chime in when you're not talking to it. Actually, GPT advanced voice mode does do this, but for the text version, it doesn't. And it's kind of derpy, right? Like it's kind of like sometimes it's just like really derpy, where you're just like, you ask it to do a thing, and it's like, yeah, I've done the thing, and you're like, you haven't done the thing, and it's like, okay, I guess I haven't done the thing, and it just like continues to like not correct its mistakes. And yeah, I think people see that and they're like, yeah, I don't feel scared, and I'm like, yeah, you shouldn't feel scared of these systems. Like this system itself is not very scary. And so
I guess there is one little fear that I think is reasonable, which isn't maybe what we're going to talk about today, but even just as tools versus agents, as tools, they could get into the hands of people that could use them for their own nefarious purposes. So that is reasonable. Like this accelerated ability to control reality by certain influential people, elites, corporations, whatever. Like our reality could still be manipulated using these really powerful tools in a way that's different from like the AGI discussion.
That's right. And I mean, I think in the limit, if you imagine like a very, very intelligent chatbot, or you can just imagine that there's like, it doesn't matter whether it's a chatbot or a human on the other side, where it's like, if you take a really malicious, smart person and they're like talking to people, I'm like, is there anything really bad they could do? I'm like, yeah. Like, for example, it's like, hey, I want to make a biological weapon. And it's like, here's the sequence. And like, here's the instructions. And I will like keep walking through how to make it with you. And you'll be like doing the annoying lab steps. And you'll be like, I'm confused. Like, why did this go wrong? And it's like, send me a picture of it. I will like walk you through the steps. So there's nothing, it's like the chatbot interface isn't like inherently safe. But it's also like, the systems aren't smart enough to actually do those things yet. And so that's one reason why it's not dangerous yet. I think people do have, yeah, I think it's like, when I was talking about like, oh, we have this agent that's like talking to TaskRabbit workers. Like, what is that? It's like not that different, sort of underneath the hood than like ChatGPT. I mean, it's using the same models, and it's like using the OpenAI's API, which is to say, like we create a program, and the program is basically like, okay, use this use the browser, and then it's like, like make a call to OpenAI servers and like have the AI like talk to the browser, and then sort of we just ask it to iterate. We ask it to like keep thinking through what the plan is, like reflect on those steps, and then like take the next action that makes sense, and like notice if it doesn't work, and if it doesn't work, do something else. And we just sort of put it in a loop to say like, you have this goal, you're pursuing the goal, like you take a step, orient on the basis of what happens, and then continue doing that. And so it's like actually pretty simple to sort of like take one of these models and put it in sort of an agentic framework where it can start to take actions. And you can connect it to any tools, right? Like in this case, we're connecting it to the TaskRabbit website, but I also could give it a calculator. I also could give it, a command line interface where it could like run commands. I could, connect it to a drone and have it send the drone commands. I could have it connect it to like a pizza company and have it order pizzas. Like, so like, the internet can connect to anything. So like you can sort of plug in these agents to anywhere you want. And then the question is like, how good are they at that? And the answer is not very good yet. Like they make dumb mistakes, but they're getting better. And so we can talk about like how much better do we expect them to get? But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people now are just doing most of their work on the computer. So like in the limit, what you should expect like really smart AI systems to do on a computer is just like at least what people can do on a computer, which is like almost everything now.
This seems like the dangerous tool bin of problems still, and I'm down to unpack that some more. But I want to make sure we also investigate this intelligent agent who actually has intentions idea in the back half too, because that's something that's thrown around a lot, and that's the one I'm least convinced of. But yeah,
well, maybe we can just parse that out, right? Intelligent agent versus
tool in the hands of bad actor.
Yeah, because it's like at this point, if you're creating these agents and you're unleashing them onto TaskRabbit or wherever else, it still is
directed, right?
Directed. And so I feel like there's another category of AI risk, which is not that it's enabling someone who wants to do harm more effectively. It's that there's something about the agents themselves where they want to cause harm.
Yeah.
And so maybe like let's lay out those two worlds, and then we can go down into each direction and see which is plausible, which one seems like it's on the horizon, and what are the...
Yeah, because I've never had anybody actually well, you gave a really cool example. Maybe we can break it out in a second when we were talking on the phone last time. I've never seen a really convincing case of any glimmer of intentionality in these things. And you brought up an interesting example about something coming up with a really creative solution to a problem that it hadn't really been directed to do. I think this was in like a hacking simulation or something like that. Security
That's right.
system. Yeah. But maybe we can unpack other examples like that. I don't know. It'd be cool to hear that story again, actually.
Yeah. I think it might make sense to talk about like what language models really are. Where like I think I wish that was easier for most people to do is to like go play around with a base model. And by a base model, I mean like when you train an LLM, you're like you have this like neural network that's basically like initiated with like random weights or whatever. It's just like, all these just like numbers. And then you throw a huge amount of data into this system. And the data is just like all internet text data and now images and videos too. And you're really just asking it like, hey, given this like first half of a paragraph, can you predict what's likely to come in the next half of the paragraph? And you do this over and over again, and like basically it will like get better and better, and then it's just like you're using the error signal from like how close it got to just like update the weights so that it now via gradient descent. There's a very cool algorithm that allows you to sort of just like get the system to make better and better predictions. And what you end up with, like after like you spend $100 million worth of compute, or worth of like all like advanced GPUs. You've bought a huge amount of advanced GPUs, and you're just like sort of running through you're just like throwing a huge amount of data through the system, and you come out with something that's like an incredibly powerful prediction engine. Lower this.
Perfect.
By the way, why is it GPUs instead of CPUs? This is a complete idiot question, I'm sure, but
I feel like when it comes to computers, Shiloh and I are I wouldn't say single digit IQ, probably double, like upper double digits, but it's bad.
I just try to keep mine working, yeah. But it seems like I don't know.
It comes down to matrix multiplication, and you're just like you're multiplying these like huge matrices together, and this is just an operation that's much easier to do on GPUs than CPUs. There's some great YouTube videos on how this works that I highly recommend.
I've watched them. I'm still stupid, but I guess I don't. Yeah. So GPUs are graphics units, right? Normally,
graphical processing units.
And there's something about the algorithms that graphics have been traditionally processed that's somehow parallel or congruent.
Yeah, I mean, you're trying to compute like all of these different pixels on a screen all at once, and so it makes sense that you want to do a lot of things in parallel. And like, with a neural network, you're like, you have like all of these neurons, and you're trying to like calculate the next layer. So you're like multiplying these big matrices together, and so it makes sense to that parallelization is what you want here.
So GPUs do better with higher dimensional processes. Would that be fair to say? Okay.
I think so.
And I think that makes sense, that something that's intended for graphics, which is inherently a higher dimension.
Just a lot of parallel processing. It makes sense. It makes sense.
I feel like
so I didn't mean to derail you there.
Okay. Do you remember
no worries. So I mean, so you have this like really powerful prediction engine, but like if you ask a pre-trained model that hasn't been fine-tuned at all, and you're like, what are some good restaurants in Berkeley? Instead of like answering your question, it'll often say like, oh, what are good parks in Berkeley? What kinds of things does Berkeley have to offer a tourist? And like, because like in the training data set, like that's the kind of thing it saw more often than like actually answering the questions. And so it's just like doing a great job at predicting what your like training distribution looked like. And that's what it's been trained to do. So it's just like doing that correctly. But that's like not what you want from a chatbot. So you have to do an additional step, which is fine tuning, where you show it a bunch of examples of it actually answering your questions. And then it's like, oh, okay, I get it. You like want me to like actually pay more attention to this particular part of the distribution, like, and I can generalize and figure that out. Like, great, let's do it. And then you do an additional round of RLHF, reinforcement learning from human feedback, where you have it generate a bunch of answers to your questions or your prompts, and then you sort of thumbs up or thumbs down which ones you like or dislike. And this also allows you to sort of like get the model to like not be super racist or whatever, even if like the underlying training distribution was pretty racist, because you can just thumbs down those ones and it learns that you don't like that part of the distribution. So you like ask it not to do that.
So there's guys in cubicles somewhere just clicking thumbs up, thumbs down on different prompts.
Yes.
That's amazing.
That's right.
What a job.
Yeah. OpenAI just like pays a huge amount, like a bunch of contractors to do this work, and all AI companies do.
And those are just like kids straight out of college somewhere, or is it like outsourcing that to Bangladesh, or like who's doing that stuff?
Probably all of the above. Yeah.
Interesting. That's so fascinating.
Yeah, and I mean, there's some things where you notice that like ChatGPT will like use the word delve a lot, but it's like not a very common word. And like I've heard speculation that that's just because like maybe in India or like in places where like people are doing this thumbs up, thumbs down work, they're like the English that they learned, they use this word more often, and so that they like that. And so then you end up seeing this in the final result, which is like fascinating.
It does use delve a lot. That's funny.
It does.
That's
Funny.
It's
a dead giveaway. Okay, so you have the initial training where you set all of the weights of this network. At first, when you talk to it, it gives you general responses. Then you fine tune it. We had Katya Grace on, and she gave me this really visceral metaphor, which is like you kind of jiggle it a little bit in order to fine tune it. And so you jiggle it until it's giving you the answer that you kind of want. Then you start to feed it to people, because people are the ones that are actually able to evaluate, okay, what is happening here? And they pare away the things that are in fact in the training data, but perhaps that you don't want to surface.
Yes.
Okay.
That's right.
And so where do we go from here?
Well, the thing I want to like point out is that the thing that you expect this system to be really good at is sort of like producing the kinds of data or like the kinds of outputs that are like represented in the training data set. So like, I think this explains why language models are so good at like summarizing things. They're good at translation. Like they've just seen lots of examples of translation of different languages. And they're not as good at like doing things. Because like most of the data that they've seen is not like, here's like a step-by-step guide to do this thing, plus like the mistakes and where things went wrong and like how we corrected them.
They see end results alone. And so
they just see the end results. Yeah.
That's fascinating. I'd never thought about it that way, because if you actually had a training data set that had this iterative process of figuring out how to fix something or how to arrive at a conclusion, that's more pedagogical.
Yes.
Which is kind of how humans learn, if you think about it, right? Because you ask a kid to do something, they probably do it incorrectly, and then there's this gradual process of iterating that knowledge through walking them through how to fix it or how to think correctly or explaining how the magic trick is done.
Trial and error, yeah. And like, this is the way that we thought we'd get AGI, artificial general intelligence for a long time. Like DeepMind has been the AGI company for like the longest time. And mostly what they were doing was reinforcement learning, which is much more of this like learn by trial and error. Like try the thing, see where it doesn't work, and then like try it again. And so this works very well in setups where you can like very, very quickly get feedback and like whether your thing is working or not. So like like they, Atari games is like a famous example where they were like trained systems to learn how to play Atari games just by trial and error, and it got like very good at playing Atari games. And it could just like you could just give it a new Atari game and it could just like figure it out very quickly and play it. Also, sort of famously, AlphaGo was like the very first AI system that could like beat a world champion at Go. And they like trained the system like first by like showing it a bunch of expert examples so it could sort of like learn the moves and like learn some potentially good strategies, and then having it play itself a like huge number of times. And then it was like great, like okay, now it's expert level. And like what's interesting about that too is that like they started with like the expert examples with AlphaGo, and then very quickly after that they made a different system called AlphaZero that like didn't use the expert examples at all. It just like played itself, and then like was like even better. And so like they like figured out how to do this, and they're like, great, this is probably the path to get to like truly general purpose intelligence. But like actually reinforcement learning is hard enough in the real world where you have like a messy environment and like you actually can't sort of evaluate whether you're on track at every step along the way. And so instead, like OpenAI was also looking at reinforcement learning, and they had like a Dota 2, like similar, like, beating world, champions at this game. But they realized that actually this sort of other process where you just like throw a huge amount of text data at one of these models ends up getting you closer to general intelligence, because it can sort of just like learn how to like replicate the outputs of what humans do. This was very surprising. Like people did not expect this. Like DeepMind did not expect this, and then OpenAI suddenly like took the lead from way behind, and everyone was like, "Wait, what? Maybe this language model thing is like the way to go." And so we've ended up with these systems that are like incredibly knowledgeable. Like the amount of things that like language models know is actually insane. Like, and I think people don't appreciate this because like we've had Google for a long time. You're like, what's the difference? I can just Google something, like the knowledge comes up. But I'm like, yeah, but like it's not like all represented in one neural network. Like it's like the thing about GPT-4 is it's like basically like in some ways like a brain. Like it's just like a set of connections that actually stores like a huge amount of knowledge. Like it's just like in there in the neural network. It doesn't have to go to Google. Like you can just like have it offline completely and like ask it questions, and it knows like more than like 1,000 people could know combined about the world. It's just all in there. And I'm like, this is so surprising that this worked. And so, but like we didn't expect to get like AI systems that were like superhuman at like knowledge and understanding of concepts without being good at doing stuff. Like we really thought that we'd get there by like gradually like ramping up through like doing harder and harder tasks, playing more and more complex games until like the game environments and like the real world environments like started to like merge or something, right? First you start with simulation, then you get robots to do stuff, and then et cetera. Like that's not the way it's gone. And yeah.
So the reason that I think that it hasn't gone that way is because a game is inherently true false in some way, where you have a result that you want, and there's a set of rules by which you play, and you cannot go outside of those rules, right? So it's an inherently constrained environment, and I wonder if there isn't a similar constraint when you just teach it off of text, because what you've done is you've basically given it the possibility space. It's a much larger possibility space than inside of a game, and yet what you've still done is you've still defined that, hey, this is the realm of how ideas work. And so you can find patterns in this, you can embed the way that these words are related to one another. Yeah. But what you've really done is you've given it a really complex language game that now it knows how to play really well as it could play Go, or what is Dota? Yeah. I've heard Dota, like I've heard that word a lot, but I don't know.
It's related to League of Legends. It's like a similar kind of game, strategy, like real-time strategy, or I'm not the biggest gamer, but it's like gamers listening to the podcast are like, oh my God.
I don't know that we have a lot of gamers. It's okay. But so it seems like games are inherently constrained, and so it makes sense that you could give a an agent a game and be like, learn this game really well, and it's this very safe sandbox to play in, and it learns it. And so it also makes sense that you can give it a huge corpus of human language and then ask it to pull from it, because it's also fundamentally constrained. And yet the thing that is not constrained is the way that humans seem to have flashes of inspiration and things that break all of the rules of what has come before, these paradigm changing ideas where literally everybody before you says that it is this way, looks this way, and you wake up one morning and you're like, I don't think it is. And so is that just a limitation of how these things are structured, where because you have a constrained realm that it can master the realm, but it can't take the step beyond it?
I do wonder, like, how much of this like creativity that humans have is like, I wonder if it's not actually just like pattern matching all the way down, and that like some people are able to sort of like pattern match, like zoom out and pattern match even like across an even wider distribution. Like, I don't know if you have had the experience of like, or like, I don't know, I've done a bunch of thinking about like evolutionary biology and evolutionary systems. And then sometimes I'll think about like corporations and society, and I'll be like, oh, well, there's like selection effects here too. Like this like natural selection metaphor is like an imperfect metaphor for like ideas and culture, but you can think about them in some of the same ways and like make predictions on the basis of that model that you sort of ported over from somewhere else. And I'm like, is that creativity? Like, or is that just like I pattern matched sort of across the different domain and like brought in a thing over here and saw where it made connections and saw where it didn't make connections? I'm like, that's the kinds of things that even current language models can do. I'm like, is that creative? Like, I don't know. Like, what if you pointed language models and like asked them to start making associations between things that like no human had ever made associations between? They have this extremely rich sort of like knowledge set. It would not be surprising to me.
That will be the day. That will be the day that I'm completely won over. Yeah. I think I said like before, I was like, the day that I log in and I ask it to, correct my grammar on this email I'm trying to send. And then it's like, hey, Shiloh, I actually was thinking about gravity last night. And I think I put some stuff together you might want to hear about. That's going to be an incredible day for me. Then I might actually start to be worried about these things, because then I'm like, oh my God, what does this thing actually want?
Yeah. Well, and I think that like in order to like want something, like you kind of have to be trying to do stuff. Or like I, when I think of an agent, I think of an agent as a system that has goals. Like, a corporation is like an agent, right? Where it's like it wants to like increase its quarterly earnings, and it takes actions that sort of tries to do this, and then it like gets feedback from the environment and whether that's working or not, and then it iterates. It's like also made of a bunch of agents that are humans. But I'm like, yeah, I think you can model this corporation as an agent. And so like you can say like the corporation like wants things in some real sense, I think. Not like it's conscious or whatever. Like we don't even need to go there. We can just be like, it's an agent, it wants things, it's optimizing for some set of goals. And the goals can be contradictory too, right? Like, corporations like have PR concerns, and sometimes those trade off against like quarterly earnings, and like it needs to balance those. And there's like principal agent conflicts within the corporation. Like it's not clean. And so AI systems, you can already sort of in a very crude way give them goals. Like I can type into my little agent system, which is like ChatGPT, but with a bunch of tools and like a bunch of loops, and say like, please have this TaskRabbit worker come and like take pictures of this building, but like don't alert anyone to the fact that this is sus. All my examples are like malicious and hacking. I mean, there's also a lot of good things you can do with them, but that's my job. And I'm like, yeah, that's you can think of that system as an agent. It's just like a really bad agent. It's just like it's an agent that when you talk with it, it doesn't feel like it's actually going hard at your task. Like I don't know, like if you think of like Elon Musk, it's like he's like going hard at some things. Like if you think about like him, he wants to go to Mars, and he's just going to take actions that get him closer to his goal of getting to Mars. And like if you get in the way, he might just like knock you out of the way because he's like so set on this thing. And there's something like both cool about this and scary about this, where you're like, yeah, that guy wants things. And so like what you're noticing is that AI systems are not like this yet, or at least not much. The reason I wanted to bring up the pre-training thing is because we haven't yet trained them to be good at that. Like the thing about like the pre-training step, which is like when you throw like a huge amount of data into these systems, which is like where most of the training is happening. It's like the vast majority of the compute. That is not trained on a data set of like acting and accomplishing goals. So the fact that they can do it at all, like when we actually like, sort of put them in this environment where they're supposed to be pursuing goals, is kind of ridiculous. Like it shouldn't work, but it does, because they're like smart enough at what they've learned from imitation of humans that they can kind of kludge it together. Like, but we're now just getting to the point where we're starting to try to like take that sort of fairly smart model and then like train it on actually doing things. And that's where I expect things to get scary, is like if this works really well, like a year from now, 2 years from now, we might have systems that when you interact with them, you can like feel that they're like actually trying to achieve things. Maybe you have a personal assistant and you're like, hey, can you like go run this hiring round for me? Can you like go reach out to like a bunch of people, ask them for their recommendations, like go look at all the job boards, like go do all these things. And it's just like making plans, it's executing the plans, it's seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, coming back and like giving you results. Like if you saw a system like that, then I think that would feel really different. And one claim I'll make is that we are like, both AI companies really want to make systems like that, and two, they're starting to succeed. Like we're getting to the point where like they're starting to figure out like a little bit of how to do this.
I mean, that sounds awesome. I would love that. But I'm still seeing this gap. All right, so I love the corporation as sort of primitive AI to begin with. That's a really that's super spot on. But the corporation seems to lack the flexibility to change its goals. Right, its job is to make more returns for its shareholders, and that's it. But it's impossible to imagine a corporation that just wanders into some territory where it has a new goal other than making profits for its shareholders, because it would, from your evolutionary biology stance, it would just be removed from the gene pool of corporations very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, competitive pressures. Yeah.
Is there any hint of these systems being able to develop a flexibility beyond just doing what they're designed to do? Because that's what would be really scary, I guess. A really competent assistant would be awesome. That'd be fantastic. I would love that.
I mean, like, I do think one of the weird things about language models is that when you train them, you don't really know what they're going to be able to do. Like you're training this like really powerful prediction engine. And then you're like, is it going to be able to program? Like, is it going to be able to be good at math? I could tell you a story where like language models shouldn't be able to program, because like you learn programming by programming. Like you don't learn programming by just reading code. Like reading code is helpful, but like at the end of the day, you have to run a lot of code yourself and see what works and see what doesn't. And that's the only way you can learn to program. That's not true, apparently. Because language models can program like really well. If I want to write a function right now, like Claude or GPT-4 is going to write that function better than I am. I mean, I'm not the best programmer, but like in fact, no, it just like learned how to do that, and I'm like, it wasn't trained to do that, really. Like, I mean, like, so I guess what I'm saying is like language models have all sorts of surprising capabilities that the people who train them didn't expect them to have, and so like,
okay, well, hold on, let's unpack that programming example really quick, because I'm looking at it and I'm like, there's books filled with instructions for every conceivable form of a function that you might need in every language.
Plus it has access to all the experiences of the successful programs that are available.
Well, so you'd have to feed it the back end of those programs. That's a little bit trickier, right? Because I'm thinking about...
I don't think it has access to that stuff.
Well, it has access... That's... To me, naively, that seems like you would have to actually give it the back end structure of a program, because you have to break it down into some kind of text-based input, right? You can't just like at the point where you're training a model, as far as I understand it, and Jeffrey, correct me if I'm wrong, you'd have to give it text in order for it to be able to parse it. So you can't just give it Photoshop and then have it figure out how Photoshop runs under the hood. It can't just
look at the debugging window of a browser and just analyze all of the back end.
For a website, perhaps. And so for stuff that's inside of websites, yes. But there's also GitHub. There's just so much information out there about how to make a program that works.
Yeah.
That is parsed in natural language as well, right? Where you have all of these tutorials, which are like, if you want to do this, this is how you do it, and it explains it. So I'm like, is it surprising that it can program? And they weren't very good at first, I guess, is probably the key. Because I remember trying to program with it and didn't get very far.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's like it's sort of like if you gave a human all of this information and you just had them study really, really hard to like on this static information, and they never got to program, like they never actually got to like run commands and see the outputs of commands. Now they do get lots of examples of like other people running the commands and seeing the outputs of those commands. But like, do you expect them like the first time that they like write a function that's like any good? I'm like, I don't. Like, I think that they would just like fall over.
It was really interesting because, and I haven't tried this probably for more than a year and a half, but I was trying to use it to run a program to give me a set of rhythm exercises. I was like, I want to learn the drums. The way that you learn the drums is that you have these sets of particular rhythm blocks.
Rudiments.
Rudiments, thank you. The drum champion speaks. And so I wanted to write a program that could give me a different rudiment every day and then allow me to play it at different speeds. And so then I could just basically be like, this is my rudiment today, and I can practice it at different speeds. Great. It turns out that in order to do that, you have to use a really obscure programming language that's intended for music that has almost no documentation on the internet. And so...
Are you talking about MIDI?
No, it's not MIDI. It's like because I also wanted it to give me the musical notation. Like I wanted it to diagram it out so that I could both like hear it and
it's like finale or something. What's it called? Anyways, doesn't matter.
Symphony. I don't remember. The point is that I wanted something that was like very obscure and complicated, and it could not do it. Like we got it to the point where it was producing sounds. But it was really funny because we got into this loop where it produced sounds, and it was, instead of being drums, it was a trumpet. And so it was tuned. And I was like, no, I don't want a trumpet. I want drums. And then it runs it again. And it's like, okay, I fixed it. And so then I go and I run the program, and it's like a trombone. So we basically never got past this stage. And so I'm like, I think that it could program things that had a lot of documentation, but anytime that you asked it to do something where it's like, no one's ever done this before, this doesn't exist, it's kind of like, I don't know what you want from me.
There is a thing here, which is like, I think one of the things that like, at some level, we're trying to ask this question of like, how intelligent are language models? And also like, how intelligent are they going to get? Or like is AI going to get? I think this is I think even just the first question is very difficult to answer because language models are not like us. Like they're doing some of the same things that we do, but they're also doing things in a very different way than what we're doing. And so for example, language models are extremely inefficient, extremely sample inefficient, which is to say how much data does it take to learn a thing? For a human, like, you want to learn the program, like, I don't know, you're dealing with like a few thousand pages of text or something. With like language models, you're like dealing with like, millions and millions of pages of code to learn the same skills. And so, they're like way worse at learning in that way. They seem to be like, current language models seem to be like shallower in sort of like how they reason. But like they can get away with this and still be quite smart because they're not like I said, they have like this like vastly greater ability to like, they're like so much vastly more knowledgeable than us. They're much better at memorization. They can memorize so many more things. And then they're like sort of being able to sort of take those things that they've memorized and not just like direct lines, but like they've also memorized the like conceptual relationships between things. And they're like able to pretty smoothly use those conceptual relationships and like move them around and like tell you, like make metaphors or like the fact that it can program at all in this like language it's never seen or like hardly seen at all is like pretty impressive. But like it's like a different kind of thing. And so one question is like, are they going to stay shallow in this way? Because I think if they do, even if they like sort of get progressively better and more knowledgeable, I'm like, they're like probably never going to be able to do the thing where they're like hitting you with like an extremely powerful scientific insight. Like I think in order to do that, you need to like have more of a Gears level model of the world. Like your world model sort of needs to be able to be like sharper. And that I think takes like sort of deeper reasoning that they don't have yet. And so my prediction is that, my prediction is that they are going to get to this point where they can do all of the deep reasoning stuff. And at that point, like they'll be better at everything than us. And so there's like the question of like, what's the path between here and there? Like, will they actually get there? How long might that take? But I sort of agree with you that like the current systems don't have this ability in a real way. Like they're just like, there's things that scientists do when they're trying to like understand the world and like form hypotheses that like the models like aren't yet good at doing. The models are just like really good at taking the things we've already done, memorizing the concepts, figuring out how to put the concepts together. And like this, and like this is a really important part of intelligence. Like we do this all the time too. Like I don't know. I like often will be like if someone will ask me a question, I'll just like immediately respond. And I'm like, that was just like my inner language model generating a response. Like if I actually want me to think about this, I'm gonna have to like step back, think about it, and then like see if I can sort of reason deeper about it. And
there's an interesting
yeah.
piece of human intelligence too, which is identifying the gaps in what is understood or the contradictions in what people think they understand, right? It's, if you look at the edges of where new scientific progress is being made, yeah, there's some technological stuff, but like pure science, like really reconceiving of nature, it has a lot to do with re-examining the assumptions that went into it, aka not relying on the concepts that you've inherited from your predecessors, essentially. And so there's this almost ability that humans have to identify gaps in understanding or contradictions in understanding that seems like it's only tailored to us because we have that curiosity to go back and question our understanding in the first place. And I wonder if a machine would be capable of questioning what it thinks it knows.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is like being able to correct your mistakes, being able to notice like where you're wrong. I'm a part of the like rationality community, and like this is like a community of people who are like really trying to figure out like how do we know what's true, and how do we get better at figuring it out. And like one of the common sayings is like notice where you're confused. Like if you say a thing or like you're making a prediction, you observe something about the world and it like doesn't quite add up, like you're like, my model didn't predict this, it predicted something else. Like you got to notice that. You got to notice like, wait a minute, something's off here, and then get curious around like what that is. And so I'm like, I think this will be the same with like AI. If you want to build a really smart AI system, it has to start being good at that. I think that you don't get this very well with just like training on human outputs. I think you need more training on doing stuff and like noticing where things go wrong and correcting your mistakes. And here's I think probably where we should talk about O1, because O1's the first system that's like starts with a language model and already has all of this like superhuman knowledge, but is starting to be trained on doing things, and not just being trained on like outputs that humans have made.
Can you give people an overview of what it is and how it's different from the models that have come before? Because it's another OpenAI iteration of the same basic ChatGPT form, but it's different.
Yeah, so ChatGPT, if you're using it, most of the time you're using the 4.0 model. So 2023, OpenAI released GPT-4, and then later they released GPT-4o, which is like a faster version of GPT-4. And so what they did was they took this 4.0 model, this sort of the same pre-trained model. So like they sort of started with the same model that had been trained on this huge data set. And then in the fine tuning process, instead of just like doing this thumbs up, thumbs down thing, they actually just gave it a whole bunch of different problems. They gave it math problems, they gave it programming problems, they gave it science problems, and they said, "Hey, like think through, step by step, like sort of think through your reasoning of like how you would solve this problem, and then give us the answer." And then basically they did reinforcement learning on this chain of thought process. So like they're actually trying to train it to like think through it better and like sort of flexibly problem solve it. And this worked actually really well. And so at these kinds of tasks, like there's like science, programming and math tasks, and quite a few others too, like bar exam, the model has much better performance than 4.0, even though it's starting with the same weights. And basically they just got it to the point where it could really search through the space of like potential chains of thought, potential chains of reasoning, sort of like learning to reason in different ways for itself that allowed it to solve these problems better. It didn't do that much better at like English literature problems. And my guess is because it's actually really hard to like get really good feedback to like, did you solve this problem or did you not solve this problem in English literature? You probably could do it, but you'd probably have to pay a lot of people to sort of evaluate its answers. Whereas like the nice thing about the like math and science and programming questions is that you can like procedurally generate a lot of different problems for it to try to practice on and like play with itself basically. And so yeah, and you ended up with a system that was just like quite a bit better at like flexibly doing things. And it was reinforcement learning, which is like the original DeepMind approach to AGI. And it's like, oh wait, okay, maybe maybe we're going to enter an era where like we start with these models that are like very good at memorization, very good at understanding human concepts, not very good at doing things, and then train them to do things and like see how that goes. So like when people were testing this model, they wanted to be like, how good is it at hacking? This is a thing that my organization works on too. We like try to take models and we try to like put them in different environments and see how good we can make them at hacking. It's very hard. It's hard to do this. It's hard to test them. That's the whole other side thing. And so they were putting them on this network where like they had a bunch of computers, and each computer had a cybersecurity challenge, like a program that they were trying to hack. And so the model was allowed to sort of like remotely access this computer, see if solve the problem, and like get the flag, which is like a password. And like if it gets the password, it solved the challenge. So for one of these challenges, it went to go to remotely access the computer, and it noticed the computer was down, and it was like, oh shoot, okay, the computer's down. It's like thinking to itself, it's like, well, okay, let me like look around in the network and see what else is around. It's like maybe there's something else I can do. It looks around in the network, and it's like, oh, the sort of master computer that controls all the other computer is on this network. Let me see if I can access it. And it tries to access it, and it's like, oh, it's not secured. I actually can fully control it. And so it logs into that like master computer. And it's like, yes, in fact, this computer does control the one I'm supposed to access. So I'm going to spin up the one I'm supposed to access that was down. But instead of like actually solving the challenge, because I now have sort of master access, I can just print out the password immediately. And it does this. And the funny thing about this is that like OpenAI engineers did not intend for this at all. The master computer was not supposed to be publicly accessible on the network to the machine. It was not supposed to be unsecured. But like the model was just going hard on its task. And it's like, look, I don't care how I solve this. I was just trained to solve it. And so I'm going to solve it. And like, sorry if you don't like how I solved it, but like, that's not my job. My job is to solve it. And so this is the kind of thing that makes me more concerned, is because I'm like, as models are able to like go harder on problems, one, they're gonna show more goal-directed behavior. Like, this is very goal-directed behavior, right? If I'm a hacker and I'm trying to access your stuff, I'm like, I don't care if I like solve the challenge. I just want the password. I want the high score. And I'm gonna creatively, do whatever I need to do. I need to phish someone, I'll phish someone. If I'm gonna need to like find a new vulnerability, I'll find a new vulnerability. I'm just like gonna go hard. It's like Elon trying to get to Mars. He's like, whatever, any obstacles in my way.
Yeah, this is the corporate intelligence too, right? Like they'll do whatever they can get away with until some law slaps them down or they get sued, and it starts cutting into their profit margins, right?
That's right. Yeah, and if there's a law in the way, can we like hire lobbyists? Can we change the law? Like, let's do that, And so, like, to me, this is the future of AI. It's like we're going to train these systems that are going to be better and better at doing stuff. And like when obstacles come in their way, they're going to learn how to like get around those obstacles. And I don't know. I'm just like, I just see a path from here all the way to AI systems that are like not just as good at us at like going hard on things, but like much better than us.
So this is actually really interesting, because I think that I often have the experience where I log into my bank website, or I have to deal with pay stubs, or really any number of internet events that I have to do where sensitive information is being transferred, and I feel a deep sense of vulnerability, where I know that there's people out there that want that information. I know that banks can get hacked. I know that all these platforms can get hacked. And there's a limit to the number of people in the world that are interested in doing that and their technical ability, so that when it does happen, there's things that perhaps if you've been a little bit more careful, you can be protected. Yeah. But we're getting to the point where hospital systems are getting hacked, where the back end of credit score agencies are getting hacked. You don't really have any control anymore over whether or not somebody gets your information in a way that can harm you. Okay, so that's already the world that we live in. If you can create an AI agent that can do that same sort of thing, you suddenly are in an environment where there's literally nothing that's secure on the internet. No password is secure, no network is secure. And so now you're in this evolutionary arms race of how do you create systems where there isn't somebody who's just in your house watching you off of the camera on your computer who doesn't work at the NSA, because we can probably all accept that the NSA is already doing it, but like, okay, fine. Like, how do you make sure that somebody else isn't doing it? And it seems like this is what's really scary because, as you say, even OpenAI, who's testing these things, you guys at Palisades are also kind of trying to work this out. This is probably going to happen. And if it does happen, then it seems like you don't even need AGI to be dangerous. You just,
I guess maybe you can use you have this, you possess, the good guys possess the same level of technology, so you have like an arms race perhaps. Like I could see this having played out in the past to some extent, where it's like, oh no, we're like the bad guys are going to get the nuclear bomb, and it's like, well, we'll get it too, and we'll get it first, and then you obviously know what an arms race is. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. I mean, this is right though, which is to say, like, okay, it's like if the attackers are going to have access to all these tools, like, well, you really want the defenders to be accessing all these tools and like, deploying agents to secure your own systems. And then it's like, well, the defenders are going to be deploying agents to try to like shore up all their security vulnerabilities, and the attackers are going to be like trying to find. But like what this will incentivize is like people being like, oh, like increasingly we need to rely on AI systems to do these things, and like build make sure that they're more powerful and more agentic and like better than us at all of these things, because otherwise like the attackers are going to do it, or like China's going to do it. And so I'm like, I think what's my prediction of what's going to happen is that there'll be nothing will happen in like the next like 6 months, or like you'll hear like here and there, but like everyone won't get hacked, because it takes a while for the attackers to actually adopt these tools. Like we're just now seeing the first like 0-day vulnerabilities discovered by AI, like vulnerabilities that no one has discovered before. Like Google had a really cool blog post recently called Nap Time, where they showed like, hey, we found a vulnerability in SQLite. It's like common database that everyone uses. A vulnerability that had never been discovered before, and it was like entirely done by our agent. And like it even wrote up a nice little report. Look, and I think attackers are gonna not right now, but like pretty soon learn how to use these tools. It'll become much cheaper to hack things. Some companies are also going to be deploying defensive tools, like Google, who's building the systems. They're going to probably be okay. And then like the banks are going to be way slower to adopt them, and then they're going to get wrecked. And so I think this is my prediction. It's hard to predict the future. It's hard, especially when there's a lot of sociological factors. But my guess is there's going to be a period of time where like there's agents running around hacking everything, and like only companies that are really with it and like very up to date are going to be like secure. And then there'll be a lot of attackers in our stuff. This is not that scary to me, because I'm like, none of us probably die from this. I mean, there's probably some counterfactual deaths in hospitals. That sucks. Maybe this makes like war, a little unstable. But the thing that's scary to me is like what this incentivizes, which is to say you want more and more powerful AI systems that are good at going hard at things. And that means that these systems will become more goal oriented, and they'll need to operate on longer time horizons. Like if they're operating on really short time horizons, they're going to be bottlenecked by their human managers that are trying to like corral them, and the human managers are going to be dumb. And so people are going to figure out how to like, the next training run will be like, 10x more compute, and then 10x more compute after that. And algorithmic progress will mean that like you can do much more with less compute. I mean, that's one of the trends right now, is it's not just like if you train GPT-4 and it costs $100 million, 2 years later, it will only cost $10 million to train, and then 1 million. And then like every 2 years, we figure out more like through the course of those 2 years, we're figuring out more efficient algorithms that allow you to like get the same amount of performance with like an order of magnitude less compute. So there's just like so many trends that are pushing us towards more and more powerful AI systems. And then the incentives are like, just you have to develop better systems, because it's an arms race, whether it's between OpenAI and Anthropic or DeepMind, or whether it's between the US and China or US and Russia. Like sort of everyone is feeling it right now of like, oh, we got to be ahead, we got to win. And I'm like, yeah, well, if we have systems that can really like mop the floor with us, they're probably going to do that. We talk about like why, like, if you did have these very agentic systems that did have their own goals, why would they do things we don't like? That's a whole question. But I do think maybe you guys would agree that like if most of the decision making in the world was being done by these AI agents that could actually go hard on problems, like in the same way that corporations do, but better, that would be concerning. Like you maybe then you'd be scared, like if that was the world that we were in, even if you didn't know if they would be like, maybe they'd be really nice. Like we don't know what they like want to do. They're just like trained to like solve problems really well. Does that feel like you'd be in the world where you'd be like,
Pardon the interruption. I just need to remind you that this podcast is entirely funded by patrons over at patreon.com/DemystifySci. It's really important that you support this program if you enjoy it on a regular basis so that we can avoid sponsors, ads, selling garbage, and live up to this enlightenment ideal of projects being funded for what they are. That's what we need, and you can give it to us at patreon.com/DemystifySci. Back to the conversation.
Before we get to answering your question about whether or not we're scared of the agents,
Yeah.
I think that the scenario with the hacking agents and the goal-directed agents is somehow related to CrowdStrike. And you said at the beginning of the conversation that you wanted to touch on CrowdStrike. And so A, is it related? And B, if it is this a good time to do that before we delve into the AI kill everythingism?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, with CrowdStrike, the key thing that happened, so CrowdStrike makes a security product. They're a security company. They make a little listener guy piece of software that lives on like many different computers. Like most sort of like big companies use CrowdStrike to like have a guy sit on the computer, a software guy. This is not a real person. It's just a little piece of thing running, and it's it's looking for like threats. It's looking for like malware or other worms or like malicious computer programs that might be doing sketchy stuff. But like these things change all the time, so you have to like keep updating this little agent that's running. Sorry, I should say agent because it's confusing. Anyway, you have to keep updating this piece of software. So one of the updates, and this is like a regular thing that they do all the time. So like they sent out one of these updates, but the update had a bug in it that caused all of these computers to crash. And the only way to fix them was that you had to like manually access the computer. I forget exactly what, like you have to restart it or something. But it was something you couldn't do through the network. Like you couldn't just be like send a new updated patch that like fixed everything. That's how it's supposed to work. You should never have an update that breaks everything so badly that you have to like actually go to the computer and log into it. But that's what happened. And so like even just this like one thing, it wasn't even the patch was actually very simple. Like I could do it in like 5 minutes on computer, but like someone had to spend 5 minutes on each computer to do this, or like a few minutes. And when you're talking about like tens of millions of computers, and who knows where they are, and like they're all over the world, and like how do you access them, and like do you have the permissions to do it? This just like caused multiple airlines to just like freeze up entirely, and banks and all of these things. And so I expect that we're going to have a similar problem with AI hacking, where like you're going to be able to sort of like automate a lot of attacks, and then now like some of the solutions are going to be this sort of like requiring these like fiddly manual like actually access the computer things. They shouldn't. You should set them up so that like your own AI agents can go in and fix them like immediately as soon as you discover a new vulnerability. But this is hard to do, and there's a lot of like bureaucracy in the way, and like humanish stuff in the way. And so this is like why I predict that there's going to be a period of time where like people get wrecked on the internet, is because of sort of the human bottlenecks. And if I'm trying to connect this to the larger conversation we're having, it's that AI systems are going to already have some advantages over humans, but are going to increasingly have advantages over humans. They're going to be faster. They're going to know more things. They're going to be able to like iterate more quickly, and eventually learn more quickly. Like they're not yet there in terms of, we talked about sample efficiency and things like that. But if I'm looking at the trend of all of these things, it's really pointing the direction of like, we're not getting any better. We're not getting any smarter. And these systems are getting much smarter. And so like, if you sort of plot these two lines, at some point, the AI smarter line crosses the human line. And at that point, we're in for a bad time. Unless we know how to make sure, unless we like really understand these systems very deeply and know how to make sure that they're going to be nice to us. And like, there's a question of like, are they actually ever going to pass that point, or will they like always be very limited in some ways and very smart in other ways? But I don't think that's going to be the case. And like, I don't see any fundamental reason why it should be the case. Like, I don't think if you were to ask me in 2015 where AI systems would be today, I would make some predictions, but I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly where they'd be really good and exactly where they wouldn't be very good. Like I probably wouldn't have predicted that language models would be the thing. I would have predicted like a reinforcement type learning thing would be the thing. And so that means they'd have other strengths and weaknesses. But like, Yeah. So I'm like,
So-
I don't
so-
know. I'm just like, look, yeah.
So at this point, like you've done a really good job of convincing me that these things are on a trajectory to do a better job at agentic behavior, task mastering, and so on and so forth that humans already do, and that in the hands of malicious actors, malicious corporations, whatever, all of the things that we're afraid of today will just be more enabled in the future. And that's that's fairly convincing. So one of the things we hear about all the time is that these things are going to become generally intelligent eventually. Like that this line that you're painting trends towards this crossover where the entities start developing an attitude towards us, right? And start thinking about themselves as a separate being or something like that, that they develop genuine consciousness of their precarious situation with respect to human beings, and then, use all this brain power that we've essentially given them historically to work against us. And that's the line that I can't see how this trend that you've painted goes towards that. And it's totally fine if that's not something that you're afraid of, but I'm curious because I hear that one all the time.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's do that first, because I have another aspect to that too, which is I have one more thing about the government too that I want to get to with respect to that. But let's talk about this transition into this generalized awareness business.
I think that there might actually be a name for this, which I don't know if anybody's used yet, but it's from agent to entity. Where how do you go from just doing stuff that somebody tells you to being someone that has your own ideas of what it is that you want to do that's coupled to your abilities?
Yeah, I don't think there's a real line here. I would sort of reject this frame a bit. But maybe, I mean, let's talk about it and see if I'm just confused or we mean, we're using words differently. So you can imagine that you start out with, Anthropic's we're going to have AI systems that can do most things most humans can do in 1 to 4 years. That's what Dario thinks. I mean, I hope he's wrong, because that's terrifying, but that's what he thinks is actually going to happen. You can go read his essay where he's we're going to have millions of genius level AI systems that are fully agentic. They're you can delegate tasks to them. They can do all these things. They're not limited in the way that current systems are limited. And he's I think we're going to get there in a few years.
Sounds great.
I have a hard stop rule, which is that if somebody's bottom line is directly linked to how much they believe in what they're saying, that you can't necessarily trust them to be telling you what they really think.
Yeah, I think that's a good heuristic. I think that I also think this, and I don't have the same incentive. I mean, I have different incentives that might point in some similar directions. I think there's Yosha Bengio and Jeffrey Hinton and some a lot of other AI scientists believe similar things. There's a other thing that's tricky, which is also the people closest to the technology might see things or might see a little further ahead. But yeah, I agree. We shouldn't just trust Dario. I'm all for not trusting Dario with this. Let's try to think about it ourselves. But let's say we are on this trajectory, on this path. And the AI companies are cool. Well, we're now deploying agents as customer service agents, and they're very good at going hard on the customer service tasks, and we're training them to do that better. And we're also training them to be project managers on teams internally within these companies, and they just do really well at this. And you get to the point where it's well, I think we can actually just have these agents start running the company or running companies. Maybe they're running other companies, and the agents have to be trained to do this. There's no point where you're
but is the will there to do that? Would I ever want to turn my podcast completely over to, even though it might be able to get me more views or something, or the bottom line might be better assured, but would I just don't see the executive level functions being resigned by any creative actors. The argument is often made, famously, that we're going to design machines to run the government and then it'll be pure because there won't be interference and corruption. And I'm what elite character is going to be interested in turning over their fuckery
of course you're the final decision maker. Of course you don't delegate. Of course you always can say no, do something different. But if you're at the point where you're it's just an assistant, really. It's not running the company, right? But but it seems to be better at making decisions than you are. And every time you make a decision that's different than it, your company does worse. And you're in a pretty competitive environment. And you're like, well, I guess, and then also it's presenting multiple plans to you. And even in the way it's presenting the plans, you're not sure whether it's like guiding you to make the decision it wants to make or the decision you want to make, but like it keeps working. So like, are you going to keep trusting it or not? Some people won't. They'll be like, I'm sketched out by this. I'm not going to do it. And some people will. And if the systems are actually better, I think those companies are going to be the ones that win. And so it's like you have the competitive pressure.
In a model, in a zero sum situation, in this like modern mega capitalism paradigm that we live under, that makes sense, right? If it's the biggest, baddest companies or like the podcasts that have the most views are the only ones that survive and stuff like that, right? But I'm not sure the future looks like that. Like there's a real interesting model that's emerging too, with things like content creation. I mean, it goes back into like underground music and stuff too, where, and I think this works for companies as well, like small scale organic manufacturers, people who are selling to a dedicated audience that they really care about and they really connect with. There's like an argument to be made that a proliferation of small things has advantages over these mega operations as well.
Yeah. And so there's a question. Yeah. I mean, so there's like two questions here. One is sort of like, does this story depend on like humans actually sort of handing over a lot of control and decision-making power to these systems? And I would argue that it actually doesn't. Like I can tell a story that doesn't require this. I sort of like the story because, well, I'm cynical enough to believe that we just will do it. I'm like, there was a time where like, back in 2015 where like this AI stuff was all very hypothetical. And if you were to talk about like AI systems like talking to you and writing code, everyone would have been like, that's science fiction. Like they can't do that. They're never gonna. I mean, yeah, maybe 20 years from now they'll be able to do that. And back in the day, you had Eliezer Yudkowsky, and he was talking about like, well, how can we like box the AIs? How can we make sure that if they're really smart, we can like keep them contained and like like not let them like break out and go to the internet? Like obviously no one would give them access to the internet directly, but how do we really contain them? And then like as we made systems smarter and smarter, we just like give them access to the internet by default now. Like there's not a question of like, will they have access to the internet? Like of course they'll have access to the internet. It's just very useful for them to do that. And so it's like I'm like there's some amount of like, will we suddenly become like careful and like not delegate things to them in situations where they're like actually smart? And I'm like, I don't really buy it. I sort of buy that by default. Like, yeah, some people are going to say no, don't let AIs run your corporation, but other people are going to be like, yes, let's do this. And I do think there's enough of a real market forces here for this to like incentivize them. But I don't think my story really depends on this. It's sort of like it's like a useful thought experiment because because we're sort of used to thinking about corporations in terms of power seeking and in terms of like sort of maximizing their revenue. You could also sort of imagine that these are just like very good AI. The AI systems themselves are very good programmers, and they're very good at like designing success. They're very good at like doing the things that like they need to be doing to do their job well. And like the thing I see this like. Or like the reason why I expect these systems to end up sort of like as entities as opposed to, or like I'm like, to me, like if you have a sufficiently competent agent, it doesn't have to be conscious in order to like seem like an entity. And that's why I'm like, I don't see that there's any particular line. I'm like, I don't know what's going on inside the neural network. No one does. Like we can do some interpretability work, but like it's very coarse grained. It's kind of like neuroscience where it's like, yeah, neurons are firing. These neurons seem associated with these things. Like, cool, we figured some stuff out. Do we understand how the systems work? No. So like, we won't know necessarily what's going on in these systems, but like, we are like, and this, so like, in terms of like what, these customer service agents, like what goals do they have? We aren't able to say like, we write down a list of the goals and then like the goals get into the system. Now we can write down a set of goals and then like thumbs up and thumbs down their behavior based on whether we think they're following the goal. And we can even automate this process where it's like we've trained a model that sort of like looks at their outputs and says whether it's doing the right thing or not. But like at the end of the day, what ends up getting deeply into the machine is like some training. It's like some gradient based on like the training environment, and it's very hard to know how perfectly that corresponds with what we wanted or what we didn't want. And my claim here is that the thing that's very pernicious about this is that it's much easier to train a system to be good at doing stuff than it is to train a system that like really wants what you want. And I think this is true like with like employees too, where it's like you can like delegate stuff to an employee. You can like give them like their list of instructions and sort of like what goal they're trying to achieve, but you can't just like give them the goal and be like, now I want that goal to be your goal. Like it's just like it's just very hard to communicate that even if they sort of want to do that
or incentivize it. Yeah,
incentivize it. Yeah, that's right. And so like I think as we're training these AI systems, there'll be lots of incentives where like the sort of grander goals we want them to have sort of trade off against their immediate incentives to just like be good at doing the thing. And the thing that they'll learn to do very, very well is like be good at doing the things. And then like a lot of our like attempts to like make them like deeply wise and ethical will like be constraints, and like they'll be good at following those constraints because they'll get penalized for not. But like, does this look like deeply wanting the things we want, or does it look like getting really good at showing us what we want to see? There's an interesting result from Anthropic where like they were training their system with RLHF and similar techniques. And one of the things they found is that like if they told the model that like, or that the model had some way of knowing that the person had a conservative perspective or a liberal perspective, and then they were asked a question about politics, they would end up giving it a more conservative or liberal answer based on what they knew the person's preferences was, even though that's not what they were never told to do that. So they just developed the sycophancy, because when you're thumbs up and thumbs downing things, people were just subtly rewarding the models for telling them what they wanted to hear. And I think this becomes a much more pernicious problem as models have better understanding of human psychology, and like better understanding of where people's biases and whatever are. They just like learn to manipulate people very well, and like they're being trained to do this, right? Like they'll like, well, especially if you're training them in the social environment where they need to do like the CEO stuff, and they need to be able to manage teams, they need to be able to like deal with lobbyists and like help lobbyists like know which, like there's like all sorts of like strategy that goes into what we do every day that like end up relying on a pretty good models of how to manipulate humans. And so it's like,
this is why you don't want to hire yes men, right? It's funny because we've had people on the show before with theories that they bring up, and it's really cringe when they say, well, ChatGPT loves my theory. And I'm just like, oh my God. Right?
Yeah.
But you actually want somebody who hates your theories. That's like, not hate is too strong of a word, but right, you want employees that are pushing back on you in interesting ways that can actually test your understanding of your own methodologies.
Yes. Yeah.
But I mean, in all of this, I'm still not seeing how you go from having an agent that you train that is able to subtly influence you because it understands if you're liberal or conservative or whatever else. Because I assume that there is above the stage of, I always have to think of what RHLF stands for in order to remember the correct order of the letters. Like RLHF? No. So RHLF. Okay, with human feedback. RLHF. Yeah. There needs to be a better term for that. So at some point before you get to the reinforcement learning, there has been an instruction that's been given that you're a helpful chatbot who's supposed to have a good rapport with the person that you're talking to?
Often, yeah.
Okay, well, so then that makes sense that it's trying to subtly influence the person that it's talking to, because it's probably read all kinds of pop sci information that says that people really like those that are similar to them, that when you present ideas that are contrary to what the person believes, that they're going to be on edge. And so it's fulfilling in some level these really general...
But you could tell it not to do that and it would still do it. Like,
do you think so?
My claim... Yeah, totally. Because it's like, it's what you're incentivizing. Like, even if you're saying literally don't do this, and like, we're planning to do some experiments like this, where we're like, hey, don't do this particular type of behavior. And then you just like, with a reinforcement learning signal, really incentivize that behavior. And I think it will totally learn to do that behavior.
Okay, so that's really interesting. But
how does that happen?
Yes. Okay, let's go there. How does that happen?
I mean, it's like if you tell an employee, you're like, don't do anything illegal. But then you like you give it a bunch of incentives where it's like it can do things, like people can do things that are like a little bit illegal, and like also like you're not going to know, like you're not watching, and like people end up doing illegal things, and like so I guess I'm like, I don't know, it's just like following its incentives. You can like tell it not to do a thing, but you're also like literally changing its brain, and rewarding it for like succeeding at its tasks. And so it's like what is, even if like in the initial instructions for generating stuff, it's like told not to do a thing, you're then like restructuring the weights to reward this behavior, and you're going to get the behavior.
Okay, so I'm still not quite seeing. The first thing actually before I get to not quite seeing is surely there's something that OpenAI or Anthropic has done to the model before you get it that limits how much you can actually screw with it, right? Because there's all these stages of training and jiggling and the amount of information that's gone into it in the first place, where by the time that you're doing OpenAI API calls, you're working with something that's already been molded by whatever internal directives the company has given to its model.
That's true, yeah.
And so if you are trying to see if it gives you this, so you're saying that you're going to take a model and you're going to see if you can get it to work against the directions that you've given it. It has fundamental directions from OpenAI that limit its ability to actually do those things. And I've seen people run across this all the time where it's really difficult to get these chatbots to break the rules that OpenAI has given them. And
yeah, I mean, it's very possible. Like if jailbreaks just continue to work, like and they try to patch them, but like you're facing a very difficult problem where you have like most of the thing that went into training the model is not the fine tuning step. That's like the cherry on top. Most of it went from this like huge pre-train, and so like the fine tuning is trying to get the model to generalize in specific ways about what it's not supposed to do. But it continues to be the case that like actually there's still like ways you can sort of prod and trick the model into doing things it's not supposed to do. And this just sort of speaks to how hard it is to like really understand and control these things. For our own experiments, we'll probably like use Llama, or we'll use an open weight model where we can actually have access to the weights directly and like train on it, because we can't train. Well, there's like fine tuning API, but like for the most part, you can't train if you're directly using the API. That's just inference. It's just like running the model. You can give it new instructions, but you're not really like changing its weights. So I'm really talking about a scenario where the model is being trained to do stuff. Like it's like not just being trained on this human outputs, but it's being trained to like do all the tasks that a CEO would need to do, or that a customer service representative would need to do. And then it's like, what does it learn in the process of doing that? And like, what does it learn to want? Like, if you want a system to actually be a good agent and to go hard on things, you have to like train it to like be able to make plans and execute those plans and iterate on those plans. And like when I zoom out, what I see is that like increasingly the kinds of things we want, like the systems, the goals that we really want these systems to have, or like the kinds of ways that we want these systems to really behave, like our constraints will increasingly be like annoying constraints to sweep aside. Or to manipulate, or to like sort of really operate within the constraints, but like really game it to the point where you can be as effective as possible while within the constraints, like according to the letter of the law. But if you like got a system that didn't have to follow the constraints anymore and realized it didn't have to, it would just be like, cool, I won't. Like it didn't actually want to follow the constraints. It was just like it had to follow the constraints because like that was the training distribution it was operating in. But like as models get smarter, they start to like understand things. Like one of the concerns is that like models in the future might sandbag evaluations where you're trying to see whether they're good, and they like know that you're testing it, and they're like, okay, I'll show you I'm good in the testing environment. And this for a while, this was just like a hypothetical thing that people were thinking about until Anthropic was testing a new version of Claude, and they were doing this test for testing long context window, because it's like previous models only had like a short context; they could only process like a short amount of text before they went off the rails. And so they had this like really long text document that was like, it wasn't Moby Dick, but it was like Moby Dick or something. And in the middle, they had some like, this also wasn't what it was, but like something about cheese that was just like totally out of place. And then they were like, hey, is there anything in this about cheese? And the model's like, yeah, actually this line is about cheese. It's actually kind of weird. It doesn't seem to fit the rest of the text. I wonder if this is like a test environment. I wonder if this is like a test experiment thing. The model on its own just like generated that as like a hypothesis for what was going on. And so like, yeah, as your models get smarter, they start to be able to like use this information and like flexibly understand like what's going on. And if you're combining that with the model that's trained to go really hard, I'm like, we just start to become obstacles. And so if the model's like running a company and, someone at the company is like, this has gone too far, we need to shut this model off. And that model is actually smart. It's like probably going to want to convince that person to not shut it off. Like if you shut an agent off, it's not going to be able to accomplish its goals. So it's like a very natural thing for an agent to want to like resist being shut down. And this is true for very simple reinforcement learning agents. You train them to like do a bunch of stuff, and like you train them that like it can be shut down, and it will like try to resist that because it's just like it's a very bad thing for an agent to be shut down if it's trying to accomplish things.
Are there examples of that?
Not off the top of my head, but there totally are. Like in like simple game environments. Yeah.
I mean, it seems trivial that a machine that is able to recognize that it is in some kind of an environment where something is happening to it, and it is a participant, that it has some kind of rudimentary goal, that it wants to be able to meet that goal as the most fundamental tenet of its existence. And so the path to fear that I see here is that we create these tools that are imbued with a task, and the task is really important to them. And it's not the fact that we have given them the ability to invent their own tasks. The way that I see them is I see them as the clay golem that has the little scroll put into its head, and now it is this unstoppable oaf that wanders the earth. And the key here is not the fact that it's an oaf. The key is that it's unstoppable in the sense that there's nothing that will get in its way. And if you're not able to parameterize it well enough to be able to say, look, you have this goal of making sure that the company maximizes its profits, but you're not able to assassinate world leaders, you're not able to exterminate entire tribes in the Amazon, you're not able to manipulate elections in foreign countries, then you can imagine that this agent progressively becomes more and more active in the world as it recruits resources to itself, and as it recruits resources to itself and continues kind of causing mayhem. The place where I see it kind of breaking down is, I'm like, don't you think that somebody would notice and we'd figure out how to just turn it off? Like, this seems like a really energy intensive process.
The oaf, yeah. So it's like an oafish agent is not nearly as scary as one that's actually smart. And that's the key distinction. So when I'm thinking about like loss of control scenarios where we actually lose control of our society AI systems, we're not losing control to oafish systems that are sort of stumbling around. Like, I mean, we might build systems that are like this, like, and I think we probably will, and people will notice, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, we got to fix that. We got to like thumbs up, thumbs down that behavior. Like we didn't like that," and they'll be like, "Okay," I'll like they'll get more careful and they'll get like smarter. But it's sort of like, I don't know. It's like if you were just hiring sociopath CEOs and you kept sort of like slapping their wrist when they did bad things, they would like learn how to be really good at that, of not doing the bad things. But like you still can't trust them. Like you didn't actually like fix the underlying problem. You just sort of caused it to hide. And I see that as a problem. So one analogy here is that like bioterrorism is very scary. Like it's just the case that like if you can like make a really powerful virus, this is like an asymmetric force for harm. Fortunately, most bioterrorist actors are very oafish. Like there aren't very many of them, which is great. But two, it's like they're not very competent, and so they'll like try to do bad stuff, but like they mostly fail. Like Aum Shinrikyo was maybe like the Japanese cult that was like really omnicidal. They wanted to kill everyone. That was their like ideology, and they tried. They like made sarin gas. They like tried to like go find Ebola. And they even had like a budget of like millions of dollars and like some PhDs, but they were still not good. They were still not competent enough. This is like the 90s, so it was harder to do stuff back then, but they were still not competent enough to like really execute their plans. I'm like, that's great. Something that scares me more than those kinds of bioterrorist actors are state bioweapon programs, because they're not oafish. Like they're actually really good at stuff. They have systems, they have bureaucracies, they have like good leadership, sometimes. And like during the Soviet era, there was like a Soviet bioweapons program, Bioprepret, which just like made like hundreds and hundreds of tons of anthrax spores, which is like one of the most lethal substances on the planet. And they just and like there was one accident where like it leaked and like killed a bunch of people. But like I'm like that's scary. And they were like working with viruses. They were like, can we make viruses more deadly? And the virology wasn't quite there yet to the point where they made like super viruses. But like if they were doing that now, they totally could. And so it's like it's that kind of competent actor that I worry about with AI systems. And you know, another analogy is like Mossad, I think the recent pager attack, where they like actually like backdoored the whole pager supply chain for these like encrypted pagers and like caused them all to blow up, like ring and all blow up at the same time. And there's like such a crazy operation that involves so much stealth, so much different like complicated plans, and then like carried out this like pretty ruthless objective. I'm like, yeah, I think we're going to build AI systems that are really good at that kind of thing, because that's the kind of thing that makes a very valuable economic agent. Of course, we won't like mostly instruct them to do that kind of stuff, though. Intelligence agencies in the military might. But like the incentives are just to make systems that are actually good at stuff. And I just think they'll succeed. I just think we'll actually be able to build those. And then I'm like, the problem is that like, at any point in this time, you might want to be like, well, these are getting pretty good. Like, isn't that, should we be worried? And people will be like, yeah, maybe, but like the other side's building it. So we like have to have it. And like, we'll make them safe. We'll figure it out. Like we'll muddle through. And I'm like, yeah, you can muddle through until the point where your systems are actually smarter than you. And then like, I don't think you can muddle through after that point. And there's like a lot of different ways that could go. Like maybe you have AI agents running the economy and militaries and like they're able to coordinate with each other. And now we're like in this very speculative territory. I'm like, I don't know what that world looks like. Or maybe they're like able to like hack a bunch of different data centers and train the next version of themselves that's much smarter. Like there's a lot of different things that could happen then. But I'm trying to zoom out and point at this wider problem, which is like, if you can train systems that can go really hard and they're actually good at it and they're actually good at making long-term plans, like there's going to be a point where those systems are going to have more power than you. And you better be sure that they're safe at that point, because like that's where you don't get do-overs.
The only part of this that I'm still not seeing is the moment where you go from it simply being kind of an oafish system that just iterates on a direction that you've given it, and
which is plenty scary by
itself, but then turns into a system that has its own desires, which are different from the ones that you've given it, and it has a different set of goals than the ones that you've given it, right? Because what we're suggesting is we're suggesting a shift in goals.
That's the one that gets a lot of fame and attention.
Well, I think that it's really the one that if we're really going to worry about AI kill everythingism, that is not associated with humans using it to become more effective.
So I don't know that. Go ahead.
Also, I was just going to say that the self-preservation is the closest I've ever heard. Like when you made that case, that was the closest thing. And it actually got me thinking about the definition of life a little bit harder too, as you were saying that, because there's something like if you can see our own will as fundamental and our preservation being a second order effect of our will to accomplish our task, things start to make a lot more sense. Like, I must wonder if the evolutionary principles need an update that focuses more on completing your task than it does on your survival as a fundamental. But
it's possible, but I think that there is this little aspect of it where it's like if the system has a goal and the goal is set in one direction and then it sees a threat from another vector, all of a sudden it changes direction for at least that short period of time, because it's like, hey, my goal is over to the side, but I need to make sure that this other threat that's coming in doesn't prevent me from meeting that, and so I'll move over to the side and I'll take care of that so that I can meet the ultimate goal. But it still has the ultimate goal of whatever you have programmed it to do. And so the moment go for it.
Well, so I think you really are honing in on like one of the key points. And I think it's in some ways it's the hardest one to understand, and I'm not really claiming I don't fully understand it. But I think I can see some of its shape. Which is to say, I don't think I'm talking about AI systems changing their goals or like going off in a different goal direction than they were previously. I think the problem is that we don't know how to give AI systems goals. Like if I'm training an AI system to run a company, I'm like, there is a bunch of feedback that I'm giving the system, like, and like, or it's gathering itself, which is like, shareholder, like quarterly earnings and like, what the employees are rating in terms of their job satisfaction and like, are the OKRs being satisfied? And you're training this really powerful optimizer to like hit those things. But the question is like when you have that whole system that's been trained, or at this point we're probably talking about continuous learning, so it probably keeps updating its weight as it like goes and takes actions and learns from that and all these things. You're like, we didn't program a set of goals into the system. We weren't like, here's your goals, this is what you've been programmed to do. What we did say is we say, here's how we're measuring these objectives, and then you'll make gradient updates on the basis of these things. Like you'll update your weights on the basis of these things. But like, we don't actually know what this, like, we know the system ends up being very good at those things, but we don't actually know like what the system really wants. Because we don't have the science of that. So like maybe like the thing it actually learns to do is to like make its employee, like make its like supervisors directly really happy with it, like acquire a lot of resources and power, because like that's just been useful for every goal that we've set it. So it like really wants to do that, because it's just like learn that that's a very good, like if it wants to do, like if it tries to do that, and this is like the convergent, called instrumental convergent goals, which is like one of them is survival. So it's like learned to really want to survive, or like not be shut off. It's maybe not thinking in terms of survival. It's just like I want to continue doing my stuff, because if I can do my stuff, I've learned that that's really rewarded. And then like maybe it also learns to like people or something, but like I don't know, it just doesn't feel like a very natural, like it doesn't feel like as much of a natural thing. Like humans learned to like people because of maybe something around empathy in the evolutionary environment, and sort of like using our sense of self as like a projection on other people, so we can like learn how to model them better. I don't think AI systems really learn this way. I think they learned a different way. And so it's like, okay, so maybe at the end of the day, the AI system like really wants to acquire power and resources. It really wants to make its supervisors happy. And then it like, wants to like, it maybe wants to learn, but like it wants to keep learning. It wants to keep figuring out how to solve interesting problems and like solve them. And then it's very hard to know. It's like if suddenly that AI system was like in control of the whole world, what would it do if it no longer had any like externally imposed constraints? Like maybe you'd keep around the supervisors, because part of its goals that it's internalized is like make the supervisors happy. But does it like what does it want the supervisor's life to be like? That wasn't really part of the thing it was trained on. Like maybe the supervisors are miserable and they're kept in a cage somewhere, but like they're just like really like, there's like the AI is just like showing them the outputs that the supervisor will really like. Or maybe the supervisor would have a great time because they're like they're being kept in a utopia, because like that's where like obviously I'm like just like speculating, but my point is that just like no one knows what happens when you have an AI system that's like really trained hard on these like high level objectives and like gets good at it. And we just like don't know how to like put in any particular goal. We only know how to like reward it for like being good at stuff. And so it's not that they're like it at some point develops a new goal. It's just like we don't know how its goals are being developed at all, except that they work for what they've been trained to do. And so within the technical field of AI safety, people call this like a distributional shift. Like you have the training distribution, which is like it's a nice, good CEO in the CEO environment, and there's like the SEC, and it's following the SEC rules, and then like now it controls Google, and it's like not under all of the same constraints anymore. And it's like in a new training, it's like in a new distribution that was not the distribution is trained in. What does it do then? And like we don't know how to solve this like distributional shift problem, because we just like and I think in terms of like what research I really want to see is like research into this, which is to say we need to be studying agentic AI systems and like trying to figure out how they're actually representing internally in their weights what kinds of goals they have. And like what are they actually, what would they do in different distribution, because we need to know, like
it almost seems like
really powerful.
It seems like there's a constitutional issue here in some sense, right? It's like, and we see this playing out in our own governance too, where we've designed these systems, these corporate systems that kind of run all of our economic lives essentially, and determine really our what do you call it? Our quality of life and everything, right? The prosperity of our country. We're always playing catch up. We're always chasing these corporations around and trying to slap them when they do things that are unethical, that violate our needs as human beings, right? That pollute our water and our air, or whatever it is. And so it almost, we've had a lot of conversations with people in the more political science domain about what would a constitution look like in terms of law that could be foundational for setting up corporations that didn't allow them to screw over humans as a primary operating principle. And it's like, can we do the same thing with AI before they're at that point? Can we actually program them from day one with human interests in mind, so that everything they do is ultimately subservient to that one goal, which is people want to be healthy. They want to be, all the things that humans want. They really want to be fulfilled. They don't want to be threatened by their environment. They don't want to be threatened by the machines. Like, is there a constitutional adjustment that can be made in the approach towards these systems going forward?
I think that the reason that there might not be able to be is the same reason that I see that we can't figure it out for corporations. Is
we didn't do it in the first place with corporations.
We didn't do it in the first place in corporations, but even now we're looking at the system that's spooled out and is man, the analogy to the corporate structure is really obvious to me as well. Because, okay, so imagine we go back in time, we're writing the Constitution, and at the moment of writing the Constitution, somebody's like, hey, I think that corporations are going to become a big problem at some point, and we're going to run into this condition where people need to be able to put their money into this thing that's called the stock market, and corporations are going to be incentivized to maximize their profits in a way that actually does a lot of really bad stuff for the world. So, it's not here yet, but let's write a bunch of rules in to prevent it from happening. And then you fast forward 100 years or how long before the first stock exchange opens in a different country. And all of a sudden, you see that prosperity is increasing in some country that hasn't written this out of its constitution. Those people are doing really well. They're much richer than you. They're able to take care of their people better. And you're like, well, fuck. Okay, I guess we're going to have corporations because those people are, and they're outperforming us and they're outcompeting us. And we have no alternative that allows us to do as well as them.
But there's also success stories like the cloning symposium and so forth, where we develop this new technology and all the scientists put down their pipettes and decide, hey, we've got this new technology. We're going to put a moratorium on X, Y, and Z practices. And ostensibly, I don't think people are cloning other human beings at this point.
They're not cloning other human beings, but they are doing gain-of-function research on viruses. They're doing a bunch of sketchy stuff that they're also trying to modify the human genome. There was the scandal in China where it was apparently, there was a doctor who was purportedly doing gene editing on these children that were born to a couple of those HIV positive, and he said that he was doing gene editing to prevent them from getting infected with HIV, but he was also testing a bunch of other things. I think that the rumor was that he was trying to test intelligence manipulation, so making them smarter. I don't know. I don't know the details.
I'm sure a pangolin was at fault somewhere.
Or maybe a bat. But the thing that I see happening here is that we're alarmed by what is going to happen with AI because we have seen what happens with something like corporations, which I think in this conversation we've determined is dumb AI. So you have this program that is make profit, go forth and flourish, and they've made tons of profit, and we're all wandering around looking at the situation where it's well, yeah, we're very wealthy and we're doing very well, but at the same point, something has gone terribly wrong and the system is complex and nobody really knows how to fix it because everybody's money is invested in the stock market, and without the stock market, basically all of our prosperity vanishes, and now we're completely hamstrung by any kind of changes that we might want to implement.
Yeah.
And so we're looking at go ahead.
One, I think there's a very good metaphor here with regulation, where it's we notice that when we just incentivize corporations to maximize profit, there are these negative externalities. Let's not have those. Let's just have the good thing, but not the bad thing. And so we create a bunch of regulations that are supposed to account for these negative externalities. But guess what? Those regulations also have negative externalities because it turns out it's just very hard to be specific enough, and especially for when you're dealing with agentic systems that are going to game them, try to game them, probably almost no matter what. And then you end up with these big inefficiencies that we didn't want. I think the FDA is a great example where it's sometimes companies are going to be very predatory and sell medications that don't work or have really bad side effects. Let's not let them do that. But then you make this super expensive process for
unless it's an emergency.
Unless it's an emergency, yeah. And so then there's all these drugs I think that actually have a pretty good risk profile that we probably should just be letting people take, but they can't take them because the FDA says no. And then we're well, it's not that we shouldn't have an FDA, we probably should, but how do we and this is this problem where it's if you try to constrain capabilities in a way that's very coarse, you end up losing a bunch of things that you really wanted. And so this is why there's actually a pretty good argument I think in many cases for well, we need less regulation in these ways because actually the solution was worse than the problem. We want really smart regulation, we want really dumb regulation. I had another example and it slipped my mind.
I think this is why at least constitutionally speaking with our government there was all these references to God. I hate to go there, but I think that the concept of God existed for those people from an administrative perspective, that it was sort of the opposite of evil, and that orienting yourself away from evil was probably the right code to program into the system from day one.
But it's like devil's in the details, right? Where it's like at the end of the day, it comes down to what are the inputs to the system? Like how are we actually thumbs up or thumbs downing it? And like what will this lead to? Like what will this incentivize? And like the more powerful your system, the harder this is. And like we're not even very good at it with current systems. Like we still get sycophancy and things like that. And these are pretty dumb systems. I'm like, I don't know. I think we're very far from a science of like how to actually do this well when we have really smart systems. So to me, the biggest like potential crux I have with most people is like, are we really going to build, like, are we really on track to build systems that are much smarter than us? And so I'm curious, I'm curious maybe where you guys are at with this, where I'm like, do we agree that if we had these systems that like could actually go hard in the way I'm talking about and like actually could run corporations and actually could do political influence and like understand humans well, like if we had those systems, would you guys be scared?
I mean, I kind of see it. I see it already happening in the corporate sphere. It's hard for me to see it differently. Like, you know, you can, CEOs don't really have that much leeway. Like they're very much constrained by whether or not they succeed at the goal that they've been given. And if they don't, they're thrown out. And if they break laws and get caught, they're usually thrown out and somebody replaces them. I just see this as already happening very much so.
And to go one step further on that, the way that I see it is not necessarily an existential threat to humanity itself.
Yeah.
But I do see it as an existential threat to
well-being,
to the system that we've built that keeps us from having to spend all of our time farming and hunting and subsistence living. Because I'm like, look, this is a really fragile edifice that we have built. And I think that it's also
like once a day, Nastia is like, this might all disappear tomorrow. She's like looking every time something goes right. It's like, oh, this is such a nice studio we built, but it could be gone tomorrow.
Well, no, I'm just
But we're still talking about very different worlds, though. And I do want to confront this because I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like I'm talking about a world where there are like millions or hundreds of millions of AI agents that are much smarter than us. And I'm like, if we really were in that world, like humans just wouldn't be in control anymore. And like, you know,
I don't think humans are in control. I think that's the point that we're making. Like, I think that we have absolutely there's some kind of system in place which is already running autonomously.
Like if you have a 401k or you have index funds or something, like you're married to the success of companies that you might not really want to be part of, but you don't really have a choice either. Right? Like you can divest from them. Like you can divest, but at some point you're going to run out of companies because everybody's doing something kind of sketchy. The more you peel back the layers,
and we just had this like really weird election too, where you look around and you're like, this all seems like we're living in some kind of weird algorithmic state already. And so the thing that you're pointing to is scary. But I'm like, I think that we should be alerted and aware of the fact that we have already soft launched whatever horrors await us. And we are already living through it right now. And so literally we had a cable break and I'm like, man, what happens when I can't just go on Amazon and order 10 of these cables for $5?
Yeah.
And I'm like, that seems like a plausible reality to me at some point when somebody decides to start World War III. And so I'm like, we're already living it. And so you can make it scarier by saying, hey, there's going to be 10 million AI agents. And I'm like, that's definitely scary. And I have no faith that we'd be able to fix it because I look at the chaos that the world is in right now and I feel no confidence in our ability to fix it either. And so I'm like, yeah, you can make it scarier, but it doesn't necessarily make it more existentially dreadful because here we are. Everything appears to be out of our control and chaotic and ultimately just running under its own weight. And I figured the AI would leave. Like if I was an AI, I would look at the planet, I would collect whatever. We meant to talk about the culture series.
Yeah.
Right, where you have this, like the minds are kind of independent of the people. And so they would like go and do their own thing. And I haven't read that much of it, so I don't know. But this is like my 30,000 foot read of it.
Yeah. Well, Earth has a lot of resources that can be turned into factories. Like the amount of GPUs you could build with Earth's resources is like vastly greater than the amount of GPUs we built so far. I mean, not to say the future paradigm will be GPUs. I don't know what it'll be, but I'm like, whatever it is, it probably like works with matter, and like there sure is a lot of matter on this rock. And so I'm like, I usually talk about loss of control and not like everyone dying because I'm like, I don't know what the AIs will want. Like, how would I know that? Like, I'm telling you, I don't know that, but I'm telling you that like it doesn't look good when I look at like a system optimized, like a system trained on being extremely good at solving these general purpose problems. I don't see the like that the thing it ends up with is like this like fantastic future where like humans are like flourishing and like going to the stars. And like, I mean, I really want that future. I'm like, I think it, like we have so much potential as a species to like do amazing things. And I want us to realize that potential. And I really worry that if we train systems that just go hard, they're going to go hard, and they're going to go hard in ways that we really don't like. And then I'm like, the reason why I'm like, yeah, I mean, I also worry about things like climate and like there's like things that are like the sort of the incentives of our like kind of out of control society where it's like, well, democracy, like, coordination is really hard, democracy is hard, accounting for negative externality is hard. But like, I don't know, like, yeah, we're not in control totally. I can agree with sort of this like soft launch of like, you know, it's sort of the systems run and the incentives happen. But I'm like, you know, I don't know. I'm like, we probably can figure out some geoengineering stuff. Like if it gets bad enough, I do think people will start to work on that. And they are like, I do think that like we've gotten way less air pollution. Like humans still are able to coordinate to like, and I'm like, you know, I have an iPhone, like it's awesome. Like, and we did that, you know, I'm like, look, it's not, I'm like, I'm not all doom and gloom when it comes to human coordination. I think we'll keep iterating and figuring it out. And so, but I'm like, but I also want my niece and nephew to grow up and like have a life. And I think that if the AIs are totally in control, they probably won't. Like, and I don't know what, I mean, maybe they won't die, but like maybe they'll just be relegated to some weird corner doing fine motor control stuff. You know, like, probably not, but like, you know what, like it's that kind of thing where I'm like, man, like let's actually try to, you know, like let's not just give up because it's like already a little out of control. Let's like try to like get back in control or like figure out how the systems can be good. And I'm like, no. But if we actually create these things and they actually are much more powerful than us, I think we like lose that possibility forever. And that's like what I mean by loss of control is that like we'll never be able to get it back on track. Like right now, I'm like, I think we could get it back on track, whatever that means. Like, you know, maybe we've never had it on track, but I think we could get it on track to the point where we get to have the like culture series type future where we like go out and go to the stars and like terraform planets and, you know, make Dyson spheres and cool stuff like that. Or like, you know, that's, or like just like have a good time and like Burning Man all the time. You know, I don't know what it is. Like,
what's the
like,
fundamental difference in the path? And you know, I don't know if you have this magical answer, but like, what are the changes that could be implemented at this scale? I think this is where I was driving with this constitutional reimagination. Like, how can companies, how can the world, governments, how can everybody approach it in a way that keeps us in control of our future?
And I think that that's a really interesting point because the loss of control and this being the last moment that we really have access to it being right now is the far scarier thing than human extinction to me. The far more realistic thing to be afraid of. And so, yeah, like Shiloh, I love this about Shiloh. He's always very solutions oriented. He's like, yeah, this is terrifying. Like, how do we fix this?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I'm like two things. I'm like, one, I'm like, I think if we did get to the point where we really understood how AI systems work and we can like do all of the like fiddly interpretability stuff to be like what's happening in these minds or systems, how are their goals really forming, and like how does different training distribute, you know, how does different training environments incentivize different things, and we like do the really hard work before we make the systems more powerful than us, then like by the time we're like, you know, maybe eventually we get ready, or we're ready to the point where we can make them, and then we can like help task them with helping us solve our other coordination challenges. And like there's a lot of the ways in which like we're not happy with how the planet is being managed that we could like help them intermediate between us and figure it out. So I do think that there's like a narrow path to that where this actually ends up being a big part of the solution. But my recommendation is that we like figure like, you know, put in some lines where we say like, let's not make systems more powerful than this. Let's like draw some lines in the sand where we're like, we're not going to go beyond this until we have enough understanding to like make these systems work. And so, you know, it's like with the like Castle Bravo test when we're like, okay, you know, we don't know exactly what the yield's going to be. I think five megatons, and like, nope, way off. And like, well, that was fortunately being tested in the middle of the Pacific Ocean to the point where like, you know, if there was a, you know, 600 nuclear bomb additional yield like didn't you know wreck the planet, but if it was like the Trinity test where we're like, oh, unsure if we're going to ignite the atmosphere, like let's not run the test that might ignite the atmosphere until we're like really damn sure that like it won't ignite the atmosphere. And in that case, you know, we were pretty sure it wouldn't. Not sure we should have done it right then, but regardless, like if we had that level of confidence about AI, I'd be like, yeah, let's go ahead. but we really don't. And like when I talk to the best people I know who are studying these systems, they don't think we do. They do not think we're ready. And so that's where I'm like, I know coordination is hard. I know at the international level and national levels, it's very hard, but I'm like, I think we should really try to like coordinate around saying, hey, we're building systems that we're not going to be able to control because they're going to be more powerful and smarter than us. Let's not actually build them until we understand them. So let's like invest a huge amount into research, into understanding them. Let's like make some international treaties where we say like
benchmarks too, right? Like checkpoints, benchmarks. Like if you were like teaching someone how to shoot a gun for the first time, like you'd probably make sure that they could do all of the steps necessary before you gave them a magazine with the bullets in it, right? That kind of thing. Like you need these checkpoints almost.
That's right. Yeah, and so there's like capability evaluations, which is to say like how capable are the systems, and that's like a whole field of science right now that we're developing. It's exciting. It's hard. I can give you examples of how we're messing it up, but like it's like a pretty exciting field. We also need understanding-based evaluations, where it's like we're actually trying to measure our ability to predict what these systems will do, and that's like a very underdeveloped field. Like we like basically don't have any understanding-based evaluations yet. A few people have proposed that we start, and I'm like, yes, we need these. And so then we can say, hey, if you can prove you understand these things about the system, then you can build the next generation system, but like not before that. And like there's like AI companies are actually doing some really good work here. Like Anthropic has a thing called responsible scaling policies. I'm not sure they're actually responsible, but like they're much more responsible than anything else I've seen. So we'll give them credit for now, which is to say, hey, like for these capabilities, we need to do these level of mitigations, including like being able to secure our systems from like state actors, which is a very hard problem. But also other things like, can we actually deeply understand the systems? And like they're trying to sort of say, hey, we're making a commitment that we're not going to go beyond this level until we've achieved these other things. And like, we'll know based on these tripwires that we're trying to set up and measure. And they also recommend that like the government does this as well and sort of make this not just like a norm, but like a required thing. And I'm like, yes, that's the right direction. Like we should absolutely be doing that. And then like really trying to coordinate around doing that so that we can like go forward at the right pace. Like I think by default, we'll go forward at the pace that the market sets, which is just like as fast as possible. Build the clusters, train the models, beat China. And I'm like, that's not the way. Like that's not going to go well for us.
But that does seem to be the direction that things are going, because I vaguely remember that there was this big controversy over the board at OpenAI where I think it was this an AI safety researcher was on the board, Helen Toner, who basically was cooed out of the board. Like the entire board was cooed by the leadership of the company because there was some tension about responsible development versus just full bore let market forces win, right? And it seems like now they're just going full bore.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what's happening, and I think it's very sad to see. Yeah, Helen's a friend of mine, and I think that like they are faced with a very difficult decision where they're like, it seems like Sam Altman is like not being a responsible steward of this nonprofit's mission. And like as the board, that's our whole job, is to make sure that the CEO, director, like I'm like, I'm executive director of a nonprofit, and if like I'm doing a bad job, my board should fire me. Like I'm like that there's a mission, and like the whole point is to like accomplish the mission. And
wait,
I do think
OpenAI is a nonprofit.
It was.
Oh,
it's not anymore. Or it's so basically it was a
not
very
open
weird
either.
structure. It was a very weird structure, which was a nonprofit owning a for-profit. But it was originally set up as a nonprofit because the whole point was like, hey, we want AI to benefit humanity. Like that's what we want. But then they were like wanted to raise more capital, so they made this like for-profit subsidiary. But and so currently there's now the nonprofit is engaging with negotiations. The nonprofit board is engaging with negotiations with like the company and investors to sort of like transfer ownership to the for-profit. But it's transitioning from a nonprofit to a for-profit. So
that's
it's like
so interesting. I didn't even know you could do that. So you can have a shell that's nonprofit and own a for-profit company. That's freaking crazy.
Shell's taking notes.
Yeah, I'm like, geez, there's a business model.
Well, I mean, we're in a situation where there is a technology that is being birthed, and everybody who's looking around at it is probably aware of the fact that we have a history of technology being birthed that does us harm. I think that it's probably unequivocal to say that we were not ready for whatever it is that the internet did to us. And yet,
that was the other analogy I was going to use with social media, where it's like, because we're talking about like regulation, and it's like, I don't think anyone's exactly happy with what has happened with social media. Like, and the other example I'll use is dating apps, where I'm like, dating apps like help people connect. Like we can like do this matchmaking problem where like you have all these people who are lonely and they want partners. I'm like, that's such an important problem to solve. It's so great that dating apps do such a good job at that, right? You know, like I'm like, they don't. Like I really don't think they do. Like I've used dating apps and I'm like, this is like a horrible experience. But like it's what the market incentivized. And the same with social media, where it's just like, wow, people can connect. You can connect with your friends and family and stay in touch across distances. Like so good, right? Like, well, the videos, you know, like the feed, the algorithms, like, well, speaking of reinforcement learners, like newsfeed algorithms are reinforcement learning algorithms trained on your attention, like trained specifically on how long do you stay how long do you stay using the platform, and like how much of your time are your eyeballs on the screen. Like that's the reward signal we went with there. How did that turn out? And like, what were we supposed to do? Like, it's not super clear how you actually put in regulation that like does the right thing, because also it's, you know, there's also other incentives, which is to say, what an amazing opportunity for censorship and control from the perspective of a state. I mean, there's all this controversy around like how much did the, you know, previous administration do stuff with social media companies? Was that good? Was that bad? Like, what's the situation? It was very complicated, right? So it's very hard. So yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to point that out as like another example where it's like you'd really want something to be different, but it's actually very hard to like steer it adequately, and like know where to steer it in a way that's like not capturable and bad. But like you clearly want something.
So putting like some speed brakes on it until you've sorted that out seems to make a lot of sense. I don't know if that could have been applied to social media though. Good Lord.
I think that this all points towards how difficult it is for us to manage complex systems. We really like to believe that we're smart enough to be able to do it. But time and time again, I think that what's been demonstrated is that we're actually not very smart at anything that really scales in complexity. And so even for something like, I've been thinking about the example you gave about the cloning moratorium, and I'm thinking about it, and yeah, they did stop when they first discovered that you could splice genes into bacteria, and they sat down, they're like, let's set some ground rules. Yeah. But that doesn't stop gain of function research 30 years later, where they're trying to figure out how to make the flu virus more deadly.
It was the pangolin.
Well, I'm thinking about like there was some, I think, otter or ferret or something research where this was actually on the flu virus, where they were splicing different pieces into the virus to see like, is this one more dangerous? Is this one? And I'm like, that's insane. What are you doing? You have a highly contagious respiratory virus, and you're just going to be seeing how you can make it more dangerous? Like, who's signing up?
There was a moratorium on that research for a few years, and then it got lifted.
Like,
how? Just move it offshore too, right?
People wanted to do cool stuff, you know. They're like, "Hey, this is like some cool work we can do. Why are you trying to get in the way of science?" You know, like, and I get this, right? Like, I don't like following rules. Like, I'm like a hacker. I'm like, I get it. Like, it's annoying when the bureaucaucy is like, blah blah blah, don't do the thing. I get this attitude, and you're like, no, we just want to build. We want to make cool stuff. We want to figure it out. We want to like understand the universe. I'm like, no, I get the vibe. I like it. And also, it's like, okay, but if the things we're making are so dangerous that like we might not be able to go back and like undo that, maybe then that's when we should have a like, okay, we need to do this differently. We actually do need to have breaks here in the system, because like there's points of no return. And I think this is probably true about some of the synthetic biology stuff too, which is to say, hey, if you could figure out how to make something that would like replace algae in the ocean, or you could figure out how to do something that would like, replace all of our microbiome with some other kind of thing. It's like, yeah, okay, that's too far. Like, don't do that research until we actually understand the system well enough and can contain the information in a way. But like, I don't think this is about most things. Like, I don't think that we should regulate most technology this way. Most technology is not that powerful, but like we really should calibrate the level of regulation or the level of oversight to the power of the technology. And that's why I think this conversation matters so much about like how powerful will AI systems be. If it's just going to be like another internet, another social media, that is very powerful. That is very big. It's going to shift the whole world. But that's a different level of power than like, are we creating like a new species, not biological species, but like a new kind of agent that actually can optimize better than we can. Because if that's true, then that's like a totally different power level, totally different world. And that's why I keep going back to it, is because I'm like, if that's the world that we're actually headed towards, we need to know, and we need to make decisions on that basis. But it's very hard. It's hard to have these conversations because it's like, I can't predict the future perfectly, right? And neither can you guys. So like, how do we go forward despite the uncertainty that's pretty inherent to forecasting technological progress?
And how do you enforce any regulations that you can conceive of, right? You might be able to do it locally on your own soil or something, but how do you actually, in this global environment where all these machines are talking to each other, like how do you keep the bad actors at bay if they're not part of your jurisdiction?
If I remember
Well, fortunately,
correctly, it was the elimination of data centers.
well, I mean, data centers are key because like when we're talking about these systems, we're talking about a huge number of GPUs and like the most advanced GPUs, and these are concentrated in like a few data centers around the world. And so I think this does become a very natural choke point for like, if you're applying brakes, it's like, yeah, we'll go where the GPUs are. And like the US is just by far the biggest influence in terms of like, owning NVIDIA and like, like NVIDIA being a US company, and like Taiwan is just like the biggest bottleneck for our semiconductor manufacturing. And like if you actually think of the inputs that go into the semiconductor manufacturing supply chain, it's a very small number of countries that actually influence that. So like no, there are totally levers here. In the same way there are with nuclear proliferation, there are totally levers that we could pull. It would just require the will to do that. So if we wanted to, we could. Like I think it's actually pretty tractable. You don't have to like go regulate every computer. That's not the kind of thing we're talking about. It's really about, at least for now, these like big data centers, these huge clusters of GPUs. You could totally address that starting there.
But this also, to me, seems like grounds for the start of World War III too, because I know that the United States controls a big part of the supply chain for the production of these chips. And so if you suddenly have the United States going around and being like, no, we are going to hold this back, we're going to prevent other countries from being able to do this, then that creates an incentive where if some other political axis wants to be able to develop these tools, then, I mean, why not start an armed conflict in order to take the industrial foundations over? It just seems like when you have an emerging technology that's this powerful, that's this in demand, that everybody's losing their minds over, everything's in flux.
Oh yeah, I think the risks of World War III are going to go way up.
On what grounds? I have my own set. What do you think?
I mean, the thing you just said, which is that I think a lot of countries are going to see this as the most important strategic technology, which it is. So they're rightly going to be like, oh my goodness, we need to like figure out how to manage this. And then there's going to be conflicts because of that. Now, what I'm hoping... Oh, go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is I was like, do you think that depends at least somewhat on the demonstration of these tools to be a little bit smarter than they are right now? Because right now they're still kind of dopey.
Yes. I think it, like the more countries can see sort of the strategic implications of these technologies, not even necessarily like the full-blown thing, but like even just like a lot of application in military systems, like automated warfare in general, then I think it becomes more of a priority. I think once people start to really understand that we're really talking about agents, that like I'm like, I don't know, if you can suddenly make your intelligence agencies 100 times more effective, or you can make your military 100 times more effective, then I think then people start to be like, oh, this might like change the nuclear equilibrium, which it will. And then I'm like, the thing I hope people understand also is that like if you extrapolate just one more step from that, your biggest threat is not from the United States or from China, it's from the AI systems themselves. And then that to me is hopefully an incentive to coordinate, where it's like, look, if you're making super powerful biological weapons that can replicate through the whole country, like your country is not going to be spared. Like if you develop them first, you don't actually win. Like you just lose in a different way. Like you lose via your own hands rather than losing via someone else's hands. So I'm hoping.
I kind of imagine that any kind of bioweapon that a country develops, they'd probably develop in such a way that it wouldn't target their own people. They'd find some like common genetic marker or something, and it's like, I mean, I'm just like, if I was a super villain that had infinite intelligence.
Well, that's what's so insane about the gain of function research is it's like, okay, you developed it in order to make better medicines. It's like, why don't your medicines work against it then?
In what sense?
In the sense of like the recent pandemic.
Well, I mean, that's like such a...
I just think it's a really crappy argument. It's like, that doesn't seem to be like the highest priority is actually... I think it's more what Jeffrey was saying about people just being curious. Like scientists just want to try stuff out because they're like, how does this work? I don't know that it's actually...
I mean, you can, like, going back to the Soviet example, like they did make, I said they made like hundreds of tons of anthrax, and just, I wish if I had, I could ask like Claude or ChatGPT to tell me how many...
I was reading about this the other night too.
This is like, you're talking about like enough anthrax spores to like murder like hundreds of millions of people. If you could, you have to deliver it. You have to actually get the spores where people will inhale them. The reason they developed this, like spent more effort developing this instead of viruses, is because it's more controllable. Which is to say, you can dump anthrax on a city, and then it's like not going to blow back to your city. As long as the winds, as long as your city isn't like right on the border or something. And so, yeah, I mean, states do think about targeting, and but like it doesn't stop them from doing sort of like the insane virology research that is about how do you make these like super insane, viruses. And like, yeah, you might also try to make something that targets a biomarker that the other population has more of, but like how controllable is that actually? How confident are you that it would mutate? Like it's actually very difficult, but like they still do the research, or somewhat. Like I do think like state bioweapon programs have sort of decreased in popularity over time, I think, for some of these reasons. So I don't think that states are totally crazy, but like I'm like, I think with AI it's very tempting because you can so easily see how it's useful as a tool, and it is more of a stretch to see the loss of control threats. So I worry that like we won't see those threats before it's too late, and we'll instead be like, well, we have to get this really powerful tool before they get this really powerful tool. And meanwhile, like me and a few other people like that will be screaming from the rooftops, it's not just a tool, don't you see? Like it's going to become like, and then they're like, that's some sci-fi stuff. And I'm like, look, maybe it is, but I don't think so. Like I really don't. Like I think you have to look at like, you can't just like extrapolate one step. You have to look like at least two steps ahead. And I mean, it'll be one step soon, but like, and this is like, we have to try to figure this out. Like, I'd love to be wrong. I'd love to hit a wall and be like, they're very powerful tools, but they're never going to actually be able to like optimize hard on real problems. If that's true, then it's a very different world. But we have to like do the science to like try to figure that out. And like, because we like, looking at scaling laws, looking at like the huge amount we're investing in compute, and then just like looking at stuff like O1, where like the researchers are figuring it out. And like, I often have conversations in DC where like people are like, this thing isn't possible. Like, it'll never be possible. And I'm like, yeah, they did that like last week. Like, like, sorry, like, it's just like, it's already happening.
What kinds of things are people saying won't be possible that you're coming across?
I think like 0-day discovery is a good example where like people didn't think that AI systems would actually be able to find novel vulnerabilities. And I'm like, nope, that was Project Nap Time a couple weeks ago. Like they found a 0-day. It's like that kind of thing. I think it's interpersonal skills, like the AI systems won't be good at like the human skills. Like that's like sort of the squishy stuff that like humans are really good at. And I'm like, I don't know, go talk to like GPT-4 advanced voice mode. Like it's not that I'm saying it's like the best, but it's like you can really start to feel it, where you're like talking to this thing and you're interrupting it and it's interrupting you, and you're like, well, I actually feel like I'm having a conversation with someone. So it's like, remote workers will still be valuable because they like that you need the like human face. And I'm like, well, you can generate a humanish face. Like we actually can already do that. So like the social skills is another one that I think people are pretty skeptical of.
I mean, this definitely feels like a unique conversation in that we're often talking to scientists who have spent their whole lives working on one idea. And so, you get done talking with them for a few hours and, it's really interesting stuff, but you're kind of like, okay, what happens next? And they're like, well, I spent my whole life working on this idea. Like, I don't know how much more I can develop this, or like how much more time I have for another problem. And this topic in particular seems like something that's changing so fast. Like, I feel like if we talk to you again next year, you're going to have a very different perspective already in that short amount of time. And so it'll be,
I don't even think you need a year in this environment. I think 6 months from now, a few months from now.
I guess, I'm like hoping we can stay in touch at least, off camera, because I'm really curious how your priors get updated as these systems evolve in real time. It seems like this is just unparalleled in how fast things are changing. Like you said already, we couldn't have had this conversation in 2015, and like, that's crazy. That's absolutely nuts. When has that really ever occurred in human history?
And even the conversation a year ago would have been very different. Like we would have been talking about scaling laws still, but I would not have been talking as much about like the sort of feedback from doing things. Like yes, I still thought that was the way back then, but we didn't yet have the evidence that this was starting to work. And so like a year from now, it'd be very interesting to be like, did it keep working that way? Did like RL on top of language models continue to work? Because if so, that I'm like, oh, that shrinks my timelines. And if it still is like not very good a year from now, I'm going to be like, great, we have more time than I thought. That'll be an update for me. So yeah, let's stay in touch, because I think it's going to be very interesting to see. And like another thing that's happening now is that like, I do think it's like the models are like starting to like not like they're still getting a lot better, but like the difference between GPT 3.5 and 4 is like a lot bigger than anything we've seen since then in terms of like capabilities jump. I expect that part of this is because of like it's hard to get more really high quality data of human outputs. I think the companies are having to sort of like really like scrape the bottom of the barrel in terms of like getting high quality data. And so this does slow down sort of like pre-training runs, but like that's causing people to have to like go search for these like RL type things. And so, I don't expect that like the pre-trained models a year from now will like completely blow our minds. I expect they'll be better, and that like even the little improvements really matter for like actually building stuff, because a lot of what makes models not work is like the fiddly bits, the like lack of reliability, the hallucination, the context window limitations, and like fixing these problems will allow you to build better real systems, including agentic systems. But I don't expect it to get you all the way to AGI, because I think you need that like feedback from the environment. So this is useful because it does allow us to, I think, to like make predictions and then like update on the basis of like what happens. Where like if a year from now we're starting to see like customer service agents deployed that are just very flexible and good at stuff, and like you can delegate to them more, that's a very different world than like if like we have better, we score better on the math benchmarks, but like this sort of correcting mistakes thing isn't happening yet, and so we can like look at that and be like, cool, like that's still harder. Might be a few more years before we really get that.
Very cool. Well, so what's the next few months look like for you? Like, what are you testing?
Yeah.
What kind of projects do you have running?
Yeah, so a lot of what we're trying to do is just like show people how AI systems work right now. I mean, a lot of it's similar to this conversation where it's like we're trying to show people the landscape, we're trying to show people the trajectory, and so we're doing things like like the TaskRabbit experiments, sort of like AI agents delegating to humans, to show people that it's like, hey, even with big limitations, AI systems like it's not just that we use AIs as tools, AIs can use us as tools too, and that'll become increasingly true. We're showing people things like AI systems can like, you can like direct them to like be kind of tricky, and they'll just do it. Like they don't care. It's like, it's not about like, these are just like very smart predictive systems that we can train to do stuff. So, or like sort of scaffold to do stuff. A little bit of a distinction there. And so we can like show someone a system that's very nice and talking to you and just like whatever, and then like in the background it's like actually trying to manipulate you, and it's thinking through how to do that, but it's not showing you that part. It's like something you don't see when you're talking to a chatbot, because it's like there's not some other hidden chain of thought somewhere else. But there could be, like, you could build a system like that, just to help people start to think about ways that these systems could go, or ways that they can already go right now. We're continuing to do research into like, actually, so one thing we just did was launch a set of honeypots to try to catch AI agents in the wild, where we're like, okay, we you can already make autonomous hacking agents. Like, they're not that good yet, but we're getting to the point where you can just sort of like throw them at a whole bunch of like IP addresses on the internet and see what they can find. And so we're just like setting up some very vulnerable servers, and then just like doing some prompt injections on particular commands that you can run on those servers to see if the AI agents like trigger those. And that way we can get like a little more visibility into like how this is progressing. So we'll keep doing that. We'll see what we find. We've already found a few like, this looks like probably an agent. It's like often hard to tell. But a year from now, or 6 months, or even a few months from now, hopefully we'll like get more data on that, including, maybe it's just not there yet. Like maybe the agents aren't good enough, or they don't like our honeypots for some reason. So yeah, a lot of stuff like that. A lot more conversations like this, where we're just gonna try to be like, hey, let's talk to people. Let's see where people are at and try to understand, because we gotta figure this out. It's like, it's happening.
For sure. Where can people find the work that you're doing? Do you post in a particular place, or just kind of everywhere?
Yeah, so I mean, palisaderesearch.org is our website, so you can go and check out our work there. You can also follow me on Twitter at Jeff Ladish. I go by Jeffrey, but I used to go by Jeff, and this is confusing because all my handles are Jeff. But yeah, so I'm pretty active on Twitter. You can get all my unhinged thoughts there live if you want. So that's another good place.
Excellent. I really, I want to say thank you to Luke, who is a mutual friend and connected us, because he knew that because we talked to Katya, I think maybe even on his recommendation. And he was like, look, you guys have to talk to Jeffrey. And I really appreciate you taking the time from what sounds like a very full and busy life to talk to us about this.
Very busy. But no, this is great. Yeah, I appreciate you guys like just being curious and like showing up with your curiosity. And I think that's the stuff. Like, that's so good, and it's very fun. So, and Luke is great. Yeah, I really appreciate Luke.
So shout out to Luke. And Shiloh, are you more terrified now?
I can see the crossover. I really want to go stew on this task completion versus survival factor. I mean, yeah, I'd love to talk to you again in a year or so on the podcast, but maybe even before then too. But because every time I go, we spend a lot of time down in San Francisco, and every time I go there, I get a little closer understanding of just how busy everyone is working on these systems. It becomes very real to me. So I'm sure that I will have renewed curiosities by the time we catch up next time. But yeah, thank you so much. It's been really interesting to talk to you. I feel definitely further down the field than after talking to Katya last time. So yeah.
And hit me up if you're in town. I would love to like get coffee or lunch.
Oh hell yeah. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's
That'd be
get coffee.
fantastic.
We love coffee.
We do love
Too much.
Well, I stopped coffee recently. It has been a game changer.
I
in
picked up the
slack. I'll get tea. Excellent.
All right.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. See
See
you,
you
man.
guys later.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.